once there was only dark. Yes, any lights went in.
We turn to the Oakland County child killing connection. I want to begin here by reading a part from page 84 of I, the Chickenhawk, to provide a little bit of context. A member of the Cass Corridor ring named Richard Lawson, a somewhat reliable police informant who dealt in half-truths, provided nondescript identifications of 3 men he claimed were linked to the murder. Suspect number 1 was likely one of Sheldon's pedophile associates, either a man named Josiah Tazalar or another named Kent Schultz. Suspect number 2 was a child pornographer in Cass Corridor named Robert Moore. Suspect number 3 was a Ford Motors employee named Ted Lamborghini. For citation 184, we return to that earlier diagram that Gerald Richards had drawn up after his arrest, depicting how basically the operations of organized pederasty function. As you can see, Richards himself mentions this Joe Tazalar right here. And some of this is a little hard to read, but he writes then in parentheses, his boyfriend is someone named Mark Shuck from Port Huron, Michigan. May be found through another BL, so boy love. And then it gets a little difficult. Also for 184, we have the case notes of Detective Corey Williams from December 7th, 2007. I received a call today from Redacted. Redacted called me today and stated that he had received my message, but had been in the hospital after having gallbladder surgery a couple weeks ago. I explained to him what I'm investigating and requested his help, in the form of looking at photographs and supplying information about Josiah Tazalar and his associates. I told Redacted that I was investigating Josiah Tazalar and his associates for the child killings, and knew that he, Redacted, had been involved with Tazalar, Francis Sheldon, and others at that time. Redacted indicated to me that he wanted to help in any way he can and is willing to meet with me, but stated he has blocked a lot of that out of his mind from back then, but would do his best to remember. We got talking about Tazalar and the camping trips that he and Jerry Richards would take the boys on, when Redacted stated that the guy I really wanted to talk to is Redacted, who Redacted stated was the boy that introduced him to Joe Tazalar and Jerry Richards. Jerry Richards was a close associate of Francis Sheldon. I asked, it's Redacted, but you could see it's Shuck. This is the Mark Shuck that was just previously referenced. If Redacted is still around, to which he stated that he was, and that he lives in Redacted. Redacted said that Redacted was the boy that kind of arranged things as far as the boys' meetings with and going on trips with the pedophiles from Port Huron, like Tazalar, Richards, Sheldon, and others. Redacted told me that he remembers Tazalar having a large old Chrysler when they went to wilderness camp in the 70s, and that he thinks his mom, Redacted, may have photos of these pedophile men and the boys by the car while camping. I asked Redacted if he remembers who took these photos, to which he stated he thinks it was one of the pedophile men who was always taking pictures. I asked Redacted if he remembered being at Joe Tazalar's place in Highland Park, to which he stated no. I then read him some of the narrative from the interview Sergeant Gorzen from the Michigan State Police did of Redacted about these pedophile men in 1976, in which Redacted described meeting Redacted and Duffy at Tazalar's house in Highland Park, where Redacted was molested by Tazalar, and he, Redacted, observed Redacted being molested by Tazalar. Redacted then stated that he did remember that and remembered those names, but stated that he has not thought about these things in 30 years and was doing his best to remember. I asked him about the name Ted Lamborghini, or Ted, to which he stated that it didn't sound familiar, but if he saw photos of these people, he would remember. I asked Redacted if he remembers boys being filmed in Highland Park at Tazalar's, to which he stated that the pedophiles took pictures of him, but that he was never in a movie. I asked Redacted if he remembers anyone making movies of the boys, to which he stated that he remembers a 6 or 7 story apartment building in Highland Park where boys were filmed, and he remembers that there was a piano there. That was all Redacted could remember at this time. The phone interview was terminated at this point, and I made arrangements to meet with Redacted in person next week. Citation 185 is Detroit man arraigned for misconduct. The Times-Herald, January 22nd, 1977. A 42-year-old Detroit man was arraigned Friday in St. Clair County District Court on 5 charges of criminal sexual misconduct. Detective Sergeant Joel Gorzin of the state police said Joseph Tazzlar was arrested in connection with an incident in June of 1975 at the St. Clair Wilderness Campground in St. Clair Township. Tazzlar is accused of committing homosexual acts with 5 teenage boys at the time, Gorzin said. Tazzlar stood mute Friday to the charges before Judge Wilbur V. Ham. Bond was set at $5,000 and examination was scheduled for February 2nd. Also for 185 is prison term, the Herald Palladium, July 26, 1977. Port Huron, Michigan. A Highland Park man, Josiah Tazzlar, 44, has been sentenced to 1.5 years to 15 years in prison for sexual offenses involving children in a park over a 3-day period. Citation 186 is the case notes of Detective Corey Williams from November 28, 2006. We find Duffy and Ralph in the tip files today. Today we found Duffy in the Michigan State Police OCCK tip files. Dave Robertson was searching the OCCK tip file that had been put on a disk and found a tip called into MSP in 1977 by Detective Sergeant Joel Gorzin, Michigan State Police St. Clair Post. The information in this tip was provided by Detective Gorzin, who obtained the information while interviewing a subject he had arrested for child molestation, named Josiah Tazzlar. Tazzlar described Duffy as a black male in his 40s that was a procurer of children and who would in turn supply these children to Francis Sheldon for the purpose of producing child pornography. In the 1988 report, Lawson told detectives that number 1, these are the suspects he's giving, number 1 suspect was supplying children to number 2 to be filmed and that the operation was being financed by Francis Sheldon. Tazzlar met Duffy in the 6 Mile and Woodward area and gave an address for Duffy of 88 Stevens, Highland Park, Michigan. Also found a connection to this tip were tips on male prostitutes in the 6 Mile and Woodward area, named Ralph Jones, white male 14, Ralph Schoenbeck, white male 19, and a Matthew Jones, black male 19 years old. The information on this Ralph is consistent with the information that Richard Lawson provided me in May of 2005. During this interview with Lawson in May, Lawson told me that there was a young white male prostitute named Ralph that was so beautiful that he was known as the Catch, and that every pedophile in the 6 Mile and Woodward area wanted him. Lawson told me at that time that if I could locate Ralph, he could possibly help me solve the Oakland County child killing case. This Ralph information is also consistent with the information Lawson provided to detectives in 1988 at the Macomb County Jail, when Lawson said that number 1, who's probably Duffy, was introduced to him in the 6 Mile and Woodward area in approximately 1977 by a prostitute named Ralph. In the 1988 report, Lawson also said that Ralph is the one that introduced him to David Schultz, whom Lawson and Ike McKinnon both thought was going to be the Oakland County child killer. He could also be number 1 or connected to Ted, Duffy, Larimer, or Tazzlar. Also attached to these tips was a tip on a subject named Michael Larimer, also provided by Detective Sergeant Joel Gorzin, who was investigating Francis Sheldon and Gerald Richards. In this tip on Larimer, Gorzin writes that Larimer was a subject that wanted to take child prostitutes from the 6 Mile and Woodward corridor to New York to prostitute them. Gorzin wrote in his notes while interviewing Josiah Tazzlar that Tazzlar told him Larimer had got a young white male prostitute high on drugs and was going to take him to New York. Citation 187 is the case notes of Detective Corey Williams. This is his February 14th, 2007 entry. Update on theory and possible connection between Ted, Duffy, Tazzlar, Corll, and Ralph Schoenbeck and Francis Sheldon. John Olett from the FBI and I were discussing this case today and talking about the connections between these subjects and things that several of these people were not truthful about. Ted failed the polygraph about involvement in the Oakland County child killings. He never denies involvement, but makes statements about the fact that he's worried about being labeled as a murderer or accessory to murder. Ted has also stated that he hasn't done what we think he has. Ted possibly made a statement in September 2007 to a cellmate that he had sex with the kids from the OCCK case, but was not the one that killed them. See September 28, 2007 for details of this. When I first interviewed Josiah Tazzler, he admitted knowing Duffy, Ted's roommate in Detroit, but denied knowing Ted. Later, Josiah made statements about going to Duffy's place in Detroit, where Duffy would supply him with kids. Josiah described Duffy's place in Detroit as being in the area of 18th and Myrtle. I knew that was the house that Duffy shared with Ted in the late 70s. Only when Josiah was confronted with the fact that he had to know Ted then, because they were roommates, did Josiah admit that he knew Ted. But stated not very well. Josiah also had been in recent contact with Skinny, knowing we're talking to Skinny, had Skinny lying for him to us about his relationship with Ted and Bob Moore. Josiah has really been trying to distance himself from Ted Lamborghini and Bob Moore. It's interesting, too, that Josiah, when asked about knowing Francis Sheldon, stated he only learned of Sheldon after receiving the discovery packet for his criminal sexual conduct case involving Sheldon in Port Huron in 1977. In Gorzin's report in 1977, Josiah's young boy lover, redacted, this is presumably Mark Shuck, told MSP that he met Josiah Tazzler through Jerry Gerald Richards in Port Huron. Jerry Richards was indicted along with Francis Sheldon, who fled the U.S. to Amsterdam in 1976 to 77, and was very close with Francis Sheldon. Redacted. He needs to be interviewed about Tazzler's Ted, Duffy, and Skinny, etc. Again, this is presumably Mark Shuck. Another interesting connection here is Ted Miller. Ted Miller called a priest in March of 1977, stating that he killed Tim King. Miller was located living in the area of 8 Mile and Inkster in Redford at that time. On his interview record, it showed his associate as John Robertson at 88 Stevens in Highland Park. 88 Stevens was Josiah Tazzler's address in the 70s, where he lived with John Robertson. This is also the same house that Redacted told police that he met a boy named Skinny that was brought to 88 Stevens by Duffy, Ted's roommate, for sex. So here we have a guy trying to confess to the killing of Tim King that is connected to Josiah Tazzler at the same house where Ted, who failed the polygraph of the OCCK case's roommate, Duffy, was bringing and sharing boys. Ted Miller was only cleared because the police in March 1977 interviewed a friend of Ted Miller's named George Richards, who told police not to believe Ted Miller because he gets drunk and makes these types of calls all the time. The police then cleared Miller and never polygraphed him. This may have been a big mistake because George Richards was a close friend of Josiah Tazzler's and possibly Francis Sheldon, both of which show connections with Ted Lamborghini that failed the polygraph and possibly made admissions about involvement. The cover-up of Ted Miller by Richards may have possibly been done to disassociate the co-conspirators in the OCCK case. Also at this time, Bob Moore, close friend of Ted Lamborghini, had an apartment above the movie theater on Woodward Avenue at 6 Mile, a block from 88 Stevens. Remember, according to Lawson, Ted Lamborghini showed him a Polaroid of Timothy King at Bob Moore's house in the Cass Corridor, when Moore became upset knowing that Lawson was a snitch. See tip on Ted Miller, located February 16th, 2007. I located Ted Miller, see February 19th. I went to his home in Detroit, March 9th. He was confirmed deceased. I believe based on this investigation that possibly Ted Lamborghini and Ted Miller are the subjects who dumped Timothy King's body in Livonia. A witness that called Livonia Police Dispatch in the evening hours prior to King's body being found described 2 subjects on Gill Road in a dark-colored gremlin. One supposedly matched the composite, and the other had a dark-colored, small to medium afro-type hair. Ted Lamborghini wore fancy wigs, and Miller, in his 1977 photo, has frizzy, almost afro-looking hair. Ted Miller was familiar with this area, and Ted also grew up in Redford. Another interesting possibility is that Josiah Tazzler is the #1 subject that Lawson described to Barry King in the 1988 FBI report that we had been trying to identify. We had already known that #2 was Bob Moore and #3 was Ted from their descriptions in that report. #1 had told Lawson in the late 70s or early 80s that he had seen the King boy in a child porn movie. According to Lawson, #1 was living in the Highland Park area at the time. It was named by Kim, child porn magazine owner in Amsterdam, to Lawson in 1979, when Lawson was in Amsterdam, as having been involved in the killing of Timothy King. We've already confirmed that Lawson did in fact travel to Amsterdam in 1979, and according to Louise Hodgson, when interviewed in 77, Josiah makes trips abroad, indicating out of the country. Josiah is Dutch, and Amsterdam is the child porn capital. This is also where Francis Sheldon fled to in 1976 while under indictment. Francis Sheldon was a millionaire and was involved in financing child porn, just like Lawson had told me. Francis Sheldon's activities in Amsterdam and his Kim subject were both confirmed by the FBI stationed in Brussels. We had sent a lead to Brussels to check on this for us and received this positive response, February 7, 2007. See details from FBI report from Brussels on February 7, 2007 for this information about Sheldon and Kim. Identified David Schultz today. His real name is Kent Gilbert Schultz, white male. Date of birth, 1944, presumably. Is what that is. I don't know why that would be redacted, though. I was reading over the Francis Sheldon file tonight and observed a Kent Gilbert Schultz, born 1944, who resides at redacted Church Street, Highland Park, Michigan. We've been trying to identify the David Schultz that Lawson and Ike McKinnon talked about arresting in 1977 for child molestation in Highland Park. I knew David Schultz had lived in the house on Church Street near Woodward and church behind the Methodist Church. I drove by there and observed that all the houses behind the church were gone. I knew the addresses would possibly be 19, 21, 23, etc. This Kent Gilbert Schultz at redacted Church Street matches what Lawson described for David Schultz. Citation 188 is the case notes of Detective Corey Williams. This is the January 4th, 2007 entry. I went through the DPD homicide file today on Titus Jones Duffy and highlighted a couple of interesting things in the file, but nothing that jumped off the page at me that would possibly connect Ted to Duffy's murder or the OCCK case. This file we will assist in putting a better timeline together on Ted and also Duffy if need be, with arrests, addresses, victims, associates, etc. The house at 18th Street in Myrtle that Ted shared with Duffy in 76 to 77 is identified in this file as 3532 18th Street in Detroit. There are a couple of utility bills to Titus Jones at the 18th Street address in the file. Duffy's son is identified as Titus Michael Jones, a black male born April 20th, 1952, who lived at 1203 Euclid in Detroit with his mother Lily Jones, Duffy's wife or ex-wife. There was a young white male, approximately 13 to 14 years old, living with Titus Jones at the time of his murder, named Douglas Carver. Paperwork found in Titus Jones' wallet showed an agreement by Carver's parents to allow their boy Douglas to live with Jones. This agreement was typed and signed by both parents. Also mentioned as a possible suspect in Duffy's murder was a John Mish. This Mish subject was identified, interviewed, and polygraphed about the murder. Mish's polygraph was inconclusive. John Mish, Douglas Carver, Titus Jones Jr., Joseph McLeod, Robert Battle, Cornelius Bill Carter, and Joseph Alexander were all interviewed about the killing, and their statements are contained in the file. One thing for sure is that it appears that Duffy left his home with someone he knew the day he was killed. The manner of death indicates a crime of passion as opposed to something like robbery or a hit. Medical examiner's opinion on Duffy's death. Titus Jones died of multiple 14 stab wounds to the chest, abdomen, right side of the face, and neck. There are also multiple, at least 5 cuts to the throat and 5 blunt force injuries to the forehead. The cut wound on the right hand and fingernail mark on the left hand is suggestive of a struggle. The deceased had not been consuming alcoholic beverages prior to his death. Citation 189, the case notes of Detective Corey Williams, August 7th, 2007. Identified Josiah Tazalar's roommates at 1012 Seminole in Detroit today. I was looking through Gorzin's report today and saw that Josiah Tazalar had moved from 88 Stevens to 1012 Seminole in Detroit late in 1976 or early in 1977. I was attempting to identify associates of his to try and show a further connection between the Tazalars and Ted Lamborghini. We've already established a loose connection between the two, with Duffy, who was a roommate with Ted Lamborghini in the mid-70s and who would bring young boys from southwest Detroit to Tazalar's home in Highland Park for their pedophile parties. Tazalar had also admitted to investigators that in the spring of 2007 that he knew Lamborghini through Duffy, only after being cornered about this. How these pedophile parties were arranged, who attended, where they took place, and what occurred was described by redacted Taslar's boy lover from Port Huron. This would be Mark Shuck, to Gorzin in his 1977 report. These same pedophile get-togethers to molest young boys was also described by Redacted to investigators in 2007. I did a MapQuest of 1012 Seminole in Detroit and observed this residence to be approximately 3 blocks away from Louise Hodgson's house on Parker Street in Detroit. Both of these residences are located east of the Belle Isle Bridge off Jefferson. In Gorzin's 1977 report regarding Josiah Taslar, the house on Seminole was described as being an apartment-type house that was rented by pedophile men. I ran a check through LexisNexis for people associated to the Seminole address and observed Richard George Tamo, white male, born redacted 1927, to be the owner of the residence for many years. Tarno's name was on the list of pedophiles associated with Taslar, Schultz, Sheldon, Miller, etc. that was put together by MSP and that task force back in '77 of pedophiles connected to these subjects in the Highland Park area. There were 2 other subjects associated to the Seminole address that were possibly other pedophile men that rented rooms from Tarno, along with Taslar. One was a subject identified as William G.I. Anderson, possibly Bill, that Redacted described, white male, born January 1924, now deceased. The second subject was a John Frederick Tascott, possibly Fred the photographer, described by Redacted and Redacted, although he does not show any ties to the Chicago area. White male, born January of 1936, now deceased. During early interviews I conducted with Richard Lawson back in 2005, he described a couple of pedophile men that lived off Jefferson near the Belle Isle Bridge that were into both young boy and young girls. Lawson told me that one of the subjects ran a pool hall in the area, was an ex-Marine, and was violent. Lawson stated further that these pedophiles were capable of committing crimes like the OCCK, and were known by Lawson to molest kids in a trailer that was behind this house. In 2005, I was unable to locate these subjects. All this information was relayed to John Owlett from the FBI. Citation 190, Case Notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 13th, 2007. Interviewed Willem Bill Taslar today, Josiah's brother. Today I went to redacted 12 Mile Road in Southfield, Michigan, and interviewed Josiah Taslar's brother, Bill. Bill's an architect and owner of Taslar Associates Architects, which is situated in Suite 103 at the above-mentioned address. Bill was the only person in the small office when I interviewed him. I identified myself and asked him if he had spoken with his brother recently, to which he stated that they speak all the time. Bill further stated that he and Josiah are good friends and have become closer over the years. I asked Bill if Josiah told him that we came to see him recently, to which he stated that Josiah had not. I asked Bill if he knew why we had contacted and talked to his brother. Bill stated it must be about the kids. I asked him what kids he was referring to, which he said kids that he has molested, referring to his brother's pedophilia. I explained that I was a member of a task force investigating the Oakland County child killings from the 1970s, and that his brother's name came up in this investigation, and that I would like to talk to him about his brother. Bill said that he would answer any questions he could. Bill said that his family came to the United States in the 1940s from the Netherlands. I asked Bill when he and his wife Ruth first arrived in the Detroit area from the Muskegon, Grand Rapids area, to which he said that he and his wife lived in Troy, Michigan from 1969 to 1971 when he first started working as an architect in this area. Bill said that in 1972 they bought the house on Windermere in Birmingham that they currently live in. I asked Bill what year Josiah came to the Detroit area from Muskegon, and did he live with him and Ruth. Bill told me that Josiah first came to the area in approximately 73 to 74 and lived with them for 1.5 to 2 years on Windermere. Bill said that in approximately 1975 to 76, Josiah got an apartment on Stevens Street in Highland Park and moved down there. I asked Bill if after Josiah moved, he would come and visit. Bill said that Josiah would come to his house about once every week or two to visit, eat, and occasionally spend the night. I asked Bill if Josiah would go for walks when he lived in Windermere or when he would come to visit. Bill said that Josiah would walk, stating that he and his wife walked too. I asked about walking to the park, to which Bill said, I don't know where he walked to, or know if he specifically went to the park, but we would walk by it. I asked Bill if he remembers the Oakland County child killings in 1976 to 1977 in this area, stating that it was all over the news. Bill said he does not remember hearing about that, stating further that he doesn't watch the news all the time. I asked him if he remembers a little boy named Timothy King that was abducted from the drugstore down the street and lived with his family a few blocks from here in this neighborhood. Bill said that he doesn't remember anything like that. I asked Bill if Josiah ever brought any of his friends out to the house, to which he stated no. Citation 191, Case Notes of Detective Corey Williams, January 4th, 2007. Info from Redacted. She names Corll Schoenbeck. I received a packet of information today from Detective Tim Larlin that contained info from a woman named Redacted from Warren, Michigan, about a possible lead in the OCCK case. She talked in her letter about some adult male pedophiles that operated in her old neighborhood on the east side of Detroit in 1976 to 1977. She talked about how in December of 76, she was almost abducted by a white male subject with dark hair, driving a small green car. She went on to say that the subject in the car looked a lot like Bob Moore or Corll Schoenbeck. I called John Owlett from the FBI and Gary Gray from the MSP and told them that this woman named Corll Schoenbeck in her information. John Owlett from the FBI had just in the past few weeks identified Corll Schoenbeck as being the older brother of Ralph Schoenbeck, the young white male prostitute that Lawson talked about in the 6 Mile and Woodward area in 1976 to 77. Lawson had told me during an interview I conducted with him in May of 2005 that if I could find Ralph, he might have information about who the Oakland County child killer is. Ralph was identified through information supplied to Detective Gorza in 1977 by Josiah Tazzlar. Tazzlar lived in the 6 Mile and Woodward at 88 Stevens area at that time. Tazzlar supplied this information about Ralph to Detective Gorzan back in 1976 to 77. Tazzlar confirmed Lawson's information about the young prostitute Ralph operating in that area at that time, stating that his name was Ralph Schoenbeck. Tazzlar also stated that a Michael Larimer had plans on taking Ralph from 6 and Woodward to New York to prostitute him, but that Tazzlar stopped him by going to Ralph's school and warning them of Larimer's plans. John Owlett talked to Ralph Schoenbeck's ex-wife, who told Owlett that Ralph killed himself years ago, his body cremated and buried next to his mother in a cemetery in downtown Rochester. It does not say in the letter from Redacted how she got Schoenbeck's name exactly, and if she had known him from her neighborhood back in the day. I tried calling her, Redacted, and it has since been disconnected. John and I will try to go interview her at her home next week. I ran Corll Schoenbeck through the OTIS system and for a CCH and located Corll Ernest Schoenbeck, white male, Redacted, 1947. Schoenbeck is currently in prison near Muskegon, Michigan for CSC 1, for a child under 13, and has a lengthy CCH. I ran a check through the Wayne County Register of Deeds for Corll Schoenbeck, which showed his name on a deed in the city of Detroit in 1992. Also on this deed were Stanley Thompson, William Bufford, Allen's Excavating, and Corll Schoenbeck. This is something else for Citation 191. This is case notes again of Detective Corey Williams from February 15th, 2007. This morning, I ran a criminal history check on Kent David Schultz and observed an arrest by the Wayne County Task Force in October of 1977 for child molestation. This matches what Richard Lawson and retired Detroit Police Department Chief Isaiah McKinnon told me about David Schultz. I ran a check on Kent Gilbert Schultz through the OTIS system and observed him to be currently in Jackson Prison for child molestation. He was sentenced in 1985 to 20 to 40 years for 2 counts of CSC1, which is child under the age of 13. Today, Gary Gray and I met with the King family at their home in Birmingham. This is Timothy King's family. The purpose of this meeting was to update the family on the direction this lead is taking and the latest information involving Josiah Tazzlar, who used to reside in their neighborhood in the mid-1970s. We also showed pictures to the family of Tazzlar, Moore, and Lawson, Lamborghini, and others associated with this lead. Neither the names nor faces were familiar to the Kings. After the meeting, I was reading some of the Schultz files from 1977 and observed that Kent Gilbert Schultz did in fact live behind the Methodist Church at Woodward Avenue and Church Street and was the caretaker of the church. This file also showed that Kent Schultz worked at a hospital. All this information matches what Lawson told us about David Schultz. An extensive investigation into Schultz was conducted by the task force in 1977. Eventually, Schultz was interviewed, polygraphed, which he passed, and was cleared of involvement in the OCCK case. Identified Ralph the Catch tonight as Ralph Redacted. I was reading the Schultz file at home tonight and observed the task force in 1977 interviewed a 14-year-old boy named Ralph Redacted, white male, born Redacted, 1963. Redacted resided at the time at Redacted, Wanda, Detroit, Michigan. During the interview, Redacted said that he has been a prostitute in the area since he was 9 years old. He also said that he has been Ken Schultz's boy lover for 2 years. This is probably the boy named Ralph that introduced him to Schultz. Citation 192, case notes of Corey Williams, June 2nd, 2005. So, jumping around the place a little bit. I interviewed Isaiah Ike McKinnon today, the ex-chief of police in Detroit, about Richard Lawson. Lawson had stated during earlier interviews that he had worked as an informant for Ike during the original OCCK investigation. Chief McKinnon told me that he was in charge of the Detroit Police Sex Crimes Unit at the time, and they were working on the child killing case. I was expecting Ike to say that Richard is not a credible person, don't believe anything he says, but McKinnon had the opposite to say about it. He said that Richard is a full-blown pedophile, was an excellent snitch, and helped his crew arrest over 20 pedophiles, working the Woodward and 6 Mile area at the time of the OCCK investigation, in an attempt to locate the child killer. Ike said that Richard is long-winded, but that if I can get him to open up about his pedophilia and past criminal activity, that Lawson would be a wealth of information and may help close unsolved crimes, including murders. The chief went on to say that they used Lawson to teach officers about pedophiles and pedophilia, and that Lawson went on the news in the 1970s to give his opinion about the child killer. I asked Ike if he or anyone in his crew would have shown Lawson, or if Lawson would have had access to any photographs of the dead kids from the investigation, to which McKinnon stated absolutely not. Ike said that Richard was well connected in the pedophile network in several states and led his crew to a raid in Detroit that yielded files of thousands of pedophiles' names around the country. I asked McKinnon, knowing everything he now knows about Richard Lawson, would he put it past Lawson to have been involved in the Oakland County child killings, to which he stated, absolutely not. McKinnon reiterated that if I can get Lawson talking, he would be a wealth of information, stating that Lawson was connected to and kept files on pedophiles in not only Detroit, but also places like Chicago, Indianapolis, New York, etc. I asked McKinnon about the David Schultz arrest, to which he said that when his crew arrested Schultz, they thought he was going to be the Oakland County child killer. McKinnon said that Lawson was the informant on the Schultz case. Schultz was cleared in the OCCK case. This is from page 86 of Eye of the Chickenhawk. Other charges possible, from the Times-Herald, October 29, 1977. A social worker charged with sexually assaulting a 12-year-old boy may face similar charges involving as many as 6 other youths, authorities say. Police said they also plan to question Kent Schultz, 32, again in connection with the sex slayings of 4 Oakland County children last winter. Detectives have said they followed up all sex offenses in the area for possible links to those cases. Schultz was scheduled for arraignment last Friday in district court. Lieutenant Robert Robertson, a member of the Oakland County Task Force investigating the killings, said Schultz was questioned earlier this year, but was released after his work records gave him an alibi. Schultz was arrested Thursday after the 12-year-old boy told police Schultz had sexual relations with him about a dozen times since June 1st. Citation 193, case notes of Detective Corey Williams, September 15th, 2006. Interview of Redacted on the phone. He talks about Richard Lawson molesting him when he was 8 years old. I conducted a follow-up interview on the phone today with Redacted. I was trying to get the last name of Frank, a Middle Eastern male that lived with Lou Fix in the Cass Corridor in the 1970s. During earlier interviews with Redacted, he told me that Lou Fix had a homosexual roommate named Frank, stating that they were both into young boys and producing pornographic movies of boys. Redacted told me that Lou Fix and Frank owned the apartment building or house together that they lived in on Canfield in Detroit, and that I could probably get Frank's last name from the Wayne County Register of Deeds office. While talking to Redacted, he told me that he remembered who molested him when he was approximately 8 years old. Redacted told me that it was Richard Lawson, and that he just recently remembered this. During an interview in early 2006, Redacted had told me that he had been molested as a child, but didn't remember who it was. Redacted went on to say that the sexual assault by Lawson took place by the pool table in the basement of the Cass Methodist Church in the Cass Corridor, Detroit. This independently corroborates information from Paul, Redacted, about a sexual assault committed against him by Richard Lawson at Cass Methodist Church. Redacted was adopted and raised at Cass Methodist Church by the senior pastor, Lewis Redmond, who currently lives in San Diego, California. Cass Methodist Church is where Lawson, Schuler, and Tippett were big brothers to the boys in the Big Brother program at the church. The Big Brother program at Cass Methodist Church was run by two pastors at the church, Lewis Redmond and Felix Lorenz. I asked Redacted if I could come interview him further about this. He stated he wants to think about it, and he would call me. This is something else for Citation 193. Case notes of Corey Williams again from August 29th, 2005. I also received the military records on Schuler and Lamborghini today from the National Archives. Along with this packet was the U.S. Customs file on Robert Schuler. These files confirmed both their military service and Schuler's U.S. Customs employment at the Ambassador Bridge in Detroit in the late 70s. Lamborghini's Navy record confirmed his statement from his interview that he was kicked out of the Navy for homosexual activity. Schuler's customs file showed a letter from a grateful parent of a young boy that was in the Detroit bus terminal from Ontario and was going to have to spend a day or two in Detroit, and Bob Schuler was kind enough to look after the young man. The parents of this boy sent a letter to U.S. Customs commending Schuler. Citation 194 is the case notes of Detective Corey Williams, September 15, 2006. This particular section we covered just a few citations ago, but it's relevant again. This Big Brother program at Cass Methodist Church was run by two pastors at the church, and those were Lewis Redmond and Felix Lorenz. Something else for Citation 194 is case notes again. This is September 13th, 2006. Gary and I interviewed Robert Redacted at Detroit Receiving Hospital this afternoon in connection to admissions Ted Lamborghini made to Parma Heights detectives about sexually molesting Roberts, Redacted, in Detroit back in the 1970s. Ted had told the Parma Heights detectives during a tape-recorded interview that he had sexually molested Michael Redacted back in Detroit in the 70s when the victims were boys. Robert was at the hospital when his brother Ronald, who we had interviewed back in June and agreed to cooperate with this investigation, telling detectives that Ted Lamborghini had sexually molested him many times when he was approximately 13 years old. Robert was not cooperative with detectives about being molested in the past by Lamborghini. See narrative report of this interview for details. This evening, Gary and I went to Redacted, Calvin, and Dearborn and conducted a tape-recorded interview of Redacted. I had interviewed Redacted in April of 2005 in connection to his involvement with Richard Lawson in Detroit back in the mid-1970s. During this interview, Redacted stated that he knew Richard Lawson and Faye Redacted back then and spent a lot of time with them. Coleman told me that he was introduced to Richard Lawson, Jim Tippett, and Bob Schuler as big brothers by Pastor Felix Lorenz at the Cass Methodist Church in Detroit when Redacted was approximately 10 to 11 years old. Redacted told me that he would ride with Richard in his Detroit Free Press van, and that Richard would take him to his house in Detroit. During the interview today, Redacted told detectives that Richard Lawson sexually molested him by performing oral sex on him approximately 4 times for a 6-month period in the summer of 1976 when Redacted was 11 years old. Redacted told detectives that 3 of these incidents took place at Richard's parents' house on the east side of Detroit in the 6 Mile Road in Van Dyke area. Coleman said that the 4th incident took place at the Cass Methodist Church in Detroit, where Richard Lawson molested him on the pool table in the church. Citation 195 is Staffers got $30,000 before home opened. The Detroit Free Press, February 6, 1972. Staffers at a Wayne County halfway home under investigation for possible mismanagement said Saturday they had received more than $30,000 in salaries even before the home was rented. According to Dr. Mary Tidlaska, director of the project, about a third of the $90,000, that would be a third, in federal funds spent on the home went to pay 9 staffers hired last summer, 5 months before the home was rented in December. The home used to treat delinquent boys opened in January when its first and so far only 3 residents arrived, 9 months after planning for it began when the federal grant was approved. Another 13,000 or 13,500 to $18,000 or to $16,000 in federal money was spent to furnish and partly renovate the house at 1764 West Forest. The home, which may now be closed by the Wayne County Board of Commissioners because of alleged mismanagement, is also costing the federal government $300 a month in rent, despite the fact that it needs an estimated $4,000 more in repairs. Dr. Tidlaska of the Wayne County Child Development Center, which administers the project, said the staff was hired when it looked as if the county had found a house for the project. But, she said, red tape and federal and county rules regarding the house caused extra months of delays. Because of the problems, the staffers spent time in training programs and working temporarily in other county child welfare programs. The Forest House was finally rented and the staff began work there in December after all requirements were approved by the grant programs, the Omnibus Crime Control Program, and Model Cities Agency, she said. 2 13-year-old boys and 1 11-year-old now living there were referred to the home by juvenile court. They spend time taking special classes in rented space at a nearby church from a teacher hired by the project, and in taking field trips and working with the staff social worker and psychologist. The 3 boys sleep in one large room, sparsely decorated in red, white, and blue, and eat together with staff members in a dining room where a still uncompleted, unfulfilled aquarium is one of their current projects. Kitchen appliances, desks for the house office, a couch, and living room chairs, and single beds for 10 to 13 boys were bought. Most of the money spent on renovation has been used to buy paint and cleaning supplies. The work was done by the staff members, Dr. Tidlaska said. Other major repair work, however, has not been completed. Both front and back doors of the house are shattered and need replacing, and nearly all of the windows need new glass. In addition, the upstairs toilet near the boys' room does not work, and the downstairs bath off the dining room is broken. County commissioners have questioned why Dr. Tidlaska chose a house so badly in need of repair. She said she spent 18 months searching the model neighborhood area where the grant required the home be located for a suitable house. Commissioner Rose Mary C. Robinson has also asked why the West Forest house was rented from the Reverend Lewis L. Redmond, the same man who was charging the county $200 monthly rent for the classroom space in his church, the Cass Methodist Church, 3901 Cass. Mr. Redmond said Saturday that he had the house available and rented both it and the church space because he knew the project directors needed 2 places. They're really getting a deal on the church, and the house is a lot lower than they could find elsewhere in this area, he said. Citation 196. Minister's son dies in shooting. Detroit Free Press, May 7, 1976. A Detroit minister's son was killed Thursday night by a shot apparently intended for a friend who had sought the young man's help in a dispute. Police say Robert Redmond, 24, was shot a short time after he and Stephen Simpson, 18, asked police at the 13th Woodward Precinct Station to arrest 2 other young men. When police said they were unable to act immediately, Redmond told them, "We'll settle it ourselves," and left the station with Simpson. Police said Redmond, the son of the Reverend Lewis L. Redmond of the Cass United Methodist Church and Center, and Simpson then returned to an apartment at 4131 3rd, where Simpson earlier had argued with the 2 men. At the apartment, Simpson demanded the return of an umbrella he had left behind, police said, and he and Brian Manier, 17, struggled over it. Police said Manier pulled the .22 revolver and fired 4 shots at Simpson. They all missed Simpson, but one hit Redmond in the upper chest. He died at the scene at 6:45 p.m. Police arrested Manier and his companion, Ricky Copley, 22, who rented the apartment. Sergeant Dan Nold of the homicide section said the original argument began when Copley and Manier objected to Simpson leaving the apartment. Knowles said at that time Manier pulled the gun on Simpson, who then went to Redmond for help. Following the shooting, the Reverend Lewis Redmond said his son was my right-hand man at the church center, where many area residents seek help. Mr. Redmond said his son had hoped to become a minister, too. Citation 197, the case notes of Detective Corey Williams, January 3, 2006 entry. First interview of Redacted. Today, my partner, Ron McPhee, and I went to Redacted, interviewed Redacted. We advised Redacted that we understood that he has lived in the Cass Corridor area his entire life and knows just about everyone that lived here at one time or another. We told Redacted that we are interested in what he knows about child pedophile pornography rings that were operating in the Cass Corridor in the 1970s. Redacted began talking to us right away with what appeared to be a sense of relief about how he was molested in the 1960s in Detroit by a subject known as Charles Chuck Costas, who later ran for mayor of the city of Detroit. Redacted began to cry, talking about being molested as a child, stating that he had a terrible childhood and that his mother was a prostitute in the Cass Corridor. Redacted continued to talk about how his prostitute mother would take him to a dentist office at Grand River in Trumbull in the early 60s, and she would allow the dentist to sexually molest Redacted in return for free dental care. Redacted could not recall the dentist's name. Redacted became upset, stating that kids were being molested and disappeared all the time in the early to mid-70s in the Cass area, and no one did anything about it until kids started disappearing in Oakland County. Redacted said that it wasn't until he moved in with the Redmond family at the Cass Methodist Church that he felt safe. During a later interview with Redacted, he told me that when he was approximately 16 years old, Pastor Lewis Redmond would watch Redacted take a shower. Redacted was close with Redmond's son, Robert Redmond, that was shot and killed in Brian Reardon and Ricky Copley's apartment on 3rd near Alexandrine in May of 1976, over the rape of a kid named Steve, Redacted, by Reardon and Copley. Redacted was a friend of Robert Redmond's. Citation 198. Cass Church hums with life each day. The Detroit Free Press, July 14, 1973. Mr. Redmond keeps the church open on Sunday afternoons. A former Michigan farm boy, he recalls, I used to die on Sunday afternoon. There was nothing to do. Ride a horse or something. That's what the farm boy recalled. His staff of five all work Sundays. Friday night is also a big time at the church. He shows movies with popcorn for all. This area cries for a good movie, he says. An Indian club will entertain between reels this week, he said. The Cass Church program includes Mondays, preschool activities, senior citizen lunches, clubs, cooking clubs for girls, ping pong for boys, game hour in the gym, boys club program, movies, pop, pool, etc. for servicemen and Wayne State students. Wayne State University, Francis Sheldon was affiliated with. Citation 199. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams, December 20th, 2005. Interview of George McMahon. Today, John, Gary, and I went and interviewed George McMahon about his involvement in the child pornography ring that was operating in the Cass Corridor in the late 70s. George told us that he has lived at his house at Redacted in Detroit since 1968. George said that he was retired from Detroit Public Schools and was employed as the local school liaison for the Burton Elementary School situated at Cass Avenue in Detroit. George said that he currently is a sociology professor at Madonna University in Livonia and teaches 5 classes per semester. George also said that he attended Wayne State University for approximately 20 years, from the mid-60s until the early 80s, when he earned his advanced degrees. George told detectives that he has been involved in running local community team programs in the Cass area for many years and has also been involved with the Cass Methodist Church. George talked about knowing Pastor Lewis Redmond and his wife, along with Pastor Felix Lorenz, but stated that he was not real close with them. George admitted knowing Bob Moore and said that he knew that Bob was involved in young kids and that he thought that Bob was a pedophile. George said that he had seen lots of young boys hanging around Bob's house on Henry Street in Detroit, where Bob ran a bike shop out of. George also said that he remembers a guy that was also into the young boys that ran a bike shop out of a house on Trumbull near Grand River in Detroit. This information matches what Faye Goley told me during an earlier interview. It kind of goes to show here just the oddness of the inconsistencies with redaction, because Faye Goley's last name was redacted in a separate entry of Corey Williams. She said that she thought that Bob Moore's bike shop was on Trumbull in Detroit. George went on to say that he never saw Bob involved in any sexual acts with kids and had no knowledge of Bob or others being involved in any filming of child pornography. George said that a boy named Redacted was one that hung around Bob Moore's bike shop. I asked George if he knew Donnie Redacted from Bob Moore's house. At first he said that he thought he remembered that name and later changed his mind, stating he was thinking of someone else. When George was asked about Ted Orr, he said that he didn't know that name. Ted Orr is the other alias of Ted Lamborghini. Ted was supposedly good friends with Bob Moore and was at Moore's home quite often. I showed George a picture of Ted, and George said he thought he looked familiar, but he wasn't sure. During our interview, George received several phone calls from a person George said was Andy Kuhn, who George said was 38 years old. George then began to run these names by this Kuhn guy on the phone, which would have been way too young back then. George said that Andy Kuhn's family owns a local bar in this area. I asked George if he knew Richard Lawson, to which he stated that it kind of sounds familiar, but he didn't think so. I showed George a picture of Lawson from 1977, and he said that he did not recognize him. George also said that he did not know Francis or Frank Sheldon. When we began talking to George about Chuck Flieger, George said he didn't know that name. I showed George a picture of Chuck, then he said, "Oh right, Chuck Flieger. Yes, I know him." After conversation with George about Chuck, it was determined that Chuck had come on to George on several occasions, sexually, but George said they never had sexual relations. George told detectives that Chuck stabbed him in the stomach, showing detectives his scar, stating it was over some money from their business they were in together, which was Cass Construction Company. Later, George told us that Chuck was making sexual advances toward him, and that he turned Chuck down, and Chuck became upset, and that's when Chuck stabbed him. George then said that Chuck Flieger lived with them for a while. I asked George when the last time was that he saw Chuck, to which he stated about 2 years ago. George asked a couple of times if Chuck was still alive. He also stated that Bob Moore is dead. Died a while ago, didn't he? During other conversations, George told us that his son, who is 35 years old, lives in Amsterdam and works for the KLM Corporation. George said that he had another son that was killed years ago in the Cass Corridor area. George denied knowing Jim Tippett, and he was shown a photo of Tippett. The second citation for 199 is the case notes of Detective Corey Williams. This is the December 6, 2005 entry. Today I met John Owlett, Gary Gray, Dave Robertson, and the MSP Crime Scene Unit in front of 3975 Cass Avenue in Detroit. I thought that I had determined for sure that this was the home that Lawson had described as being the place that Bob Moore had lived and run a bike shop out of in Detroit. Lawson has said that this was one of the places that Moore was involved in filming the kids for child pornography. We were going to take a look in the basement for old blood or semen. After we met, we realized there were discrepancies in Lawson's stories on the location of this home. I called Pastor Felix Lorenz, who is the associate pastor of the Cass Methodist Church located in that area. He stated that he did not remember a bike shop out of a house back then, but that he did not live in the area. I called Reverend Lewis Redman, who was the senior pastor of this church in the late 70s and lived near the church. Reverend Redman's wife returned my call and told me that she wasn't sure her husband would know anything like that, but that maybe her son would, that is 43 years old now. She said that her son was at work and she would ask him later. Phone conversation with Reverend Lewis Redman's wife. Reverend Redman's wife called me back later and said that her son did not remember anything like what I was describing, but that she had been thinking about it and remembered that a guy named George McMahon owns a home in the area and has lived there for many years. I was familiar with this name as a guy Lawson named in a 1988 interview, as a guy that was involved in a pedophile pornography ring in the Cass Corridor area back in the 1970s. The report from this interview said that McMahon was supplying children to Bob Moore at that time to be filmed in this pornography. Reverend Redmond's wife said that George McMahon is retired from the Detroit Public Schools and was employed for many years as the community agent for the schools and worked out of Burton Elementary School in the Cass Corridor. Earlier info from Lawson about Bob Moore was that Moore lived near the elementary school on Cass. She said that it was George's job to make sure the kids went to school. She told me that George lives on Brainerd between Cass and 2nd, near the church, and that he is a white male and would be in his early 60s today. She gave me George's phone number as redacted. She then began to talk about another guy they grew up, redacted. She said his name is redacted, and that he is long redacted, but that sentence or sentences could possibly be retrieved. Might be enough letter squiggles there to decipher it. She said that when Redacted was 14 years old, he came to live with their family at the Cass Methodist Church. She said that Redacted knew everyone in the neighborhood and was a problem child. She indicated that Redacted would not attend school, and they eventually sent him away to a school where the kids are locked down. I then began an investigation into these two names. I performed an auto-track check and located George McMahon, born Redacted 1939, living at Redacted in the city of Detroit. It showed a phone number for McMahon as 313 Redacted. See McMahon file for other people associated to that address. A few of the names mentioned in the AutoTrack report are a Freddie Gaines, Tina Harrison, and Margaret Redmond Squires. I obtained the phone number, Redacted. I called, and Redacted will be redacted. Today, Gary, Dave, and I are going to go interview George and Redacted about Bob Moore, Ted Lamborghini, and Richard Lawson about what was going on at Moore's house and the child pornography they were involved in that area in the 1970s. Third entry for citation 199 is case notes of Detective Corey Williams from January 20th, 2006. Gary and I went over to George McMahon's today and showed him the report from the interview of Richard Lawson in 1988. We wanted to see if McMahon could identify who number 1 is in the report. Everyone else mentioned by Lawson during that interview has been identified. Now that George McMahon has passed the polygraph, we tried to get him to open up about what Lawson said about McMahon also being a person who supplied kids to Bob Moore to be filmed, but that he was not involved with the kids missing from Oakland County. McMahon was uncooperative about this and continued to distance himself from Bob Moore and any involvement he had with Moore other than what he told us during the first interview. McMahon said that he knew Moore and that he used to take his and his kids' bikes there to be fixed, but that he didn't know anything about any filming that was going on. I asked George if he thought that Chuck Flieger could possibly be the person called number 1 by Lawson during that interview. McMahon said that he didn't think so, but he guessed it could be possible. Redacted called me this afternoon with information about a friend of his that is a 48-year-old white male that told Redacted that when he was 12 years old, he was molested and paid $50 to be in a child pornography movie. This subject told Redacted that this took place at the house on 2nd Avenue, just south of Selden, that Pat Dorn currently lives in. This subject told Redacted that he had entered a side door of this house when this occurred. Redacted said that he thought that George McMahon owned this house at that time and rented it out. Redacted said that this 48-year-old subject thought that the guy that he was with that was renting the part of the house that he had been in was involved in fixing bikes. During an earlier interview with Linda Lawrence, she stated that she thought that George McMahon owned the house on 2nd that Pat Dorn currently lives in. Lawrence told detectives that she thought that McMahon rented out this house. It is possible that Bob Moore was renting this house at that time, from 72 to 73, from George McMahon. I look at the deed transfers on that house from Wayne County records. McMahon has continued to deny that he has ever owned or been associated with Pat Dorn's current house. Just as a side note here, this matter of being paid $50 to be in a child pornography movie, that particular payment amount has come up multiple times in the investigation into child pornography in the 1970s, not even just limited to the OCCK case. It's kind of interesting. Citations 200 and 201, Case Notes of Detective Corey Williams, November 14th, 2007 entry. I had been meaning to take a look at Kent Schultz's CCH after his name jumped out at me on the list at MSP of those suspects that had taken and cleared a polygraph in regards to the Oakland County child killings back in the 1970s. Wasser had told me that the suspect in question, that had confessed to him about the child killings, had been brought to his, Wasser's, office by his attorney on a separate CSC case, shortly after he had been cleared by MSP in the child killings. Kent Schultz's CCH showed that he was arrested in Wayne County on October 27, 1977 for CSC and was found guilty in 3rd Circuit Court, sentenced to 5 to 15 years in the CSC case in April of 1978. I called Dave Robertson and asked him when Schultz was polygraphed, to which he stated that he was polygraphed in December of 1977 by examiner Ramatowski, an MSP examiner, and cleared. I called Jim Bevins, chief investigator at the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, and asked him to pull the court file on this case and see if Schultz's attorney in the CSC case was Jane Burgess. CSC is criminal sexual conduct, and Jane Burgess, I believe, was the lawyer who accompanied Christopher Bush in his off-the-record polygraph that he gave to Larry Wasser, in which he confessed to the killings. Bevins agreed to attempt to locate this court file, or DPD's file, on this case. I knew this was the CSC case that Lawson was the informant on when Schultz was arrested. Lawson had told me about the Schultz case during one of my early interviews with him. Lawson had also told me at that time that he was working for Ike McKinnon on this case when they arrested Schultz, and that McKinnon was in charge of the Detroit Police Sex Crimes Unit at that time. I had interviewed Ike McKinnon about this back on June 2, 2005. See the original interview of Ike McKinnon on June 2, 2005 for details. At which time he confirmed Lawson's story. McKinnon stated that his crew was working alongside the Oakland County Task Force on this Schultz case, and when they arrested Schultz, they were certain they had arrested the Oakland County child killer. McKinnon told me that Schultz was then cleared of involvement in the child killings after passing a state police polygraph. Some of this information about Schultz is matching what Wasser is holding. Schultz definitely could be the person that was cleared through a polygraph by MSP in the 70s. Then shortly after confessed to Wasser during a pre-polygraph interview on a separate CSC case. I'm trying to determine if Schultz had Burgess as his attorney then. The only other thing that does not match up to what Wasser is saying is that Schultz is still alive. Wasser is either lying about that or didn't know the person is still living. Schultz is currently serving 3 20 to 40-year sentences for multiple CSCs, ones against children that he committed in Ingham County, Michigan in 1984. Schultz is housed with Michigan Department of Corrections at the Parnell Correctional Facility in Jackson, Michigan. Kent Schultz was connected to Josiah Tazalar, Francis Sheldon, and ex-Michigan Senator Jack Faxon at that time. Faxon was in public office at the time of the killings and was friends with Schultz along with the others. With some interviews of redacted and redacted, we can probably shore up these connections to Schultz and the additional connections to Ted Lamborghini, Willem Tazalar, and Bob Moore. Citation 202. Man, 39, accused of sex with children. The Lansing State Journal, August 28, 1984. Kent Schultz, 39, of 135 North Foster Street, was charged Monday afternoon with 4 counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct in connection with what prosecutors say was sexual activity with at least 4 neighborhood children. Lansing District Court Judge Terrence Clem set bond at $25,000 surety, and Schultz was transferred to the Ingham County Jail after failing to post bail. Chief Assistant Ingham County Prosecutor Kim Eddy said Schultz was arrested by Michigan State Police troopers Saturday following an investigation with Child and Protective Services personnel. Eddy said the complaint alleges sexual encounters with an 11-year-old girl and an 11-year-old boy, along with a 7-year-old boy and 9-year-old boy during August. Citation 203. Case Notes of Detective Corey Williams. October 20th, 2008 entry. Received the Huntington Beach PD reports today on Green's arrest in 1974 for multiple CSCs in Huntington, California. This is Gregory Green, Chris Bush's colleague. This police report outlined the investigation into the incident that led to Green being arrested, charged with 45 to 50 counts of child molestation, false imprisonment, attempted murder, and then being sent to a state mental hospital where he did only 6 to 12 months and was then released. During the interview of Green, after his arrest, he named at least 15 young male victims that he had molested and sodomized many times, adding that he had molested children over 200 times while in California. Green told police he worked with a pedophile friend named Ed Mann, who ran the baseball league that Green coached in. Green told police that Mann was also a pedophile and gave Green a job coaching in exchange for Green bringing young boys to Mann for him to molest. The incident in which Green was arrested and jailed for involved a 12-year-old white male victim named Redacted. It's presumably saying he lives somewhere, a redacted city in California. Green took this boy out to a drive-in, got him some alcohol and marijuana, and then, after dark, told the boy that they were going to go retrieve a bicycle that Green had stolen earlier and stashed near the baseball fields. Green took this boy to the wooded area of the fields near the San Diego freeway and began to molest him. Green performed oral sex on this boy, then the boy became uncooperative. Based on admissions to the police by Green about anally sexually molesting boys, that is probably what Green was attempting to do when this boy became uncooperative. Green told the police that he struck the boy in the neck to keep him quiet and then put his hand over the boy's mouth until he was quiet. The doctors determined that the boy had actually been strangled by Green and showed abrasions on the inside of the mouth where Green had held his hand over the boy's mouth. After the boy was unconscious or dead, Green held a lit cigarette up to the boy's nose in an attempt to wake him. When this didn't work, Green pushed the lit cigarette into the skin on the boy's belly 3 times, attempting to see if the boy would wake up or was alive. Green then dragged the boy through the woods and field to his car and dumped him face down in the back seat of the car. Green then drove around LA trying to figure out what to do with this boy. Green eventually drove near an area hospital and dumped the boy, who was still unconscious, on the grass around the corner from the hospital. Green did not know whether the boy was alive or dead at this time. Green then drove across the street from the hospital to a payphone and called the hospital about this boy, stating that he found the boy unconscious and he thinks he needed help. Green did not give his name. After driving around, Green checked to see if they found the boy, and they had not, so he called again. The boy was eventually found, was alive, and treated. This MO of Greg Green's, or handling of the victim, is very similar to the OCCK case in regards to the age of the boy, anally molested, strangled, suffocated, and dumped in an area where they would be found. See Huntington Beach Police Department's report for details. Bush has also put his hand over a boy's mouth to keep him quiet when he was screaming. Bush did this to Vince Gunnels at Bush's house in Alma when Bush was trying to anally molest Gunnels. Citation 204 is the Flint Police Department application for arrest warrant of Gregory Green, complaint number 189277, January 25th, 1977. This is being retrieved from the hotstar.net, which is Dovey's personal website. Supplement to Circuit Court History. Defendant Gregory Green. Complaint number 1892. Charge criminal sexual conduct, first degree. January 25, 1977, Officer Tom Waldron of the Flint Police Department presented Assistant Prosecutor Lenore Ferber with the prepared circuit court history. After reviewing the court history, Ms. Ferber issued the order for warrant charging Gregory W. Green with three counts of criminal sexual conduct, first degree, on complaints 1571, 1891, 1892. On January 25, 1977, at approximately 2 o'clock p.m., the complainants on these aforementioned complaints, being redacted, met Officer Waldron at Judge Shaker's courtroom. At this time, Judge Shaker swore the complainants and signed the warrants against Gregory Green. At approximately 3 o'clock p.m. Tuesday, January 25, 1977, Sergeant Francis Miller and Officer Tom Waldron proceeded to the area of the redacted and arrested Gregory W. Green with the warrants charging him with 3 counts of criminal sexual conduct in the first degree. The vehicle owned by this subject, a brown 1974 Chevrolet van bearing 1976 license, I'm assuming plates, which was redacted, which Green was arrested, but it may be something else, but I think it's that, which Green was arrested from, was searched by Officer Waldron and subsequently tied up by Officer Gary Jennings. The defendant was then transported to the Morals Squad office of the Flint Police Department, where he was advised of the charges against him and of his constitutional rights by Officer Tom Waldron in the presence of Sergeant Miller, which he stated he understood and waived. The defendant stated that he had returned to Flint, Michigan, approximately February 14, 1976, after spending approximately 5 years in the state of California. He stated that while in Orange County, California, he had been arrested on a marijuana charge and also for criminal sexual conduct charges, approximately 45 counts, and after pleading guilty to 1 count, had spent 6 months in the Orange County Jail and 1 year in the Patton State Mental Hospital in Patton, California, being released from that institution on or about January 15, 1976. He further stated he is currently serving a 5-year probationary period for that offense, and David Witter, Genesee County Adult Probation, is currently his probation officer. In the middle of May 1976, he had obtained employment at the Kmart store on Belzay Road as a 3rd shift custodian, but has since been discharged from that place of employment. In June 1976, he became involved as the manager of a Little League baseball team in the area of his home at Redacted. He stated in June of 1976 he purchased a 125cc Yamaha from the Yamaha dealer in Flushing, which he financed through Citizens Bank. In August or September, he purchased a 1974 Chevrolet van from Al Serra Chevrolet, which was also financed through Citizens Bank. He further stated that since May of 1976, he has seen his counselor, Redacted, of the Genesee County Mental Health Department approximately twice a week, this being a mandatory part of his California probation. The defendant, Gregory Green, stated he became acquainted with the complainant, Redacted, a male, white, 12 years old, complainant number 1571, or complaint number 1571, through the Little League baseball team in June. He stated he became sexually involved with him in July and had approximately 5 to 10 different sexual involvements with this boy, the last time being somewhere in November. He stated the sexual involvement consisted of mutual oral copulation and that he had attempted anal intercourse, but that Redacted was found to be too small. He further stated he engaged in mutual oral copulation with Redacted during the months of July and August, but did not know on how many occasions. Mr. Green related that most of these offenses had occurred in his home at Redacted, more specifically in his bedroom. But then on occasion, some of these acts had occurred on the bike trail behind Northwestern High School, where he took the boys for rides on his motorcycle, and some of the acts had occurred in his van. He stated that he had mutual oral copulation with Redacted, male, white, 12 years old, complainant number 1892, at least 10 times during the period from June until through the Christmas vacation of 1976. Upon completing this interview with Gregory W. Green, he was lodged in the Flint City Jail by Officer Tom Waldron. A Western hunting knife, which was located above the visor in Mr. Green's van, and an envelope with the inscription, "You can fool your brothers by pretending you're going into the school by the cafeteria. Put your hood up and walk over to the church," which was taken from Mr. Green's person, was turned in by Officer Waldron on property receipt number 64680. Mr. Green related he had written this note with the intention of getting it to Long Redacted. Or maybe not Long Redacted, who knows. On January 26, 1977, Wednesday, Gregory W. Green appeared before Judge Shaker, at which time bond was set at $25,000 on each count, bringing the total bond to $75,000. Citation 206 is Michigan PD Incident Report, complaint number 2768677, February 24th, 1977. This comes from Catherine Broad's blog, the sister of Timothy King, who was the final victim of the Oakland County child killings. Interview of Kenneth Bowman, victim of Greg Green and Christopher Bush. Interview of Kenneth Bowman by Sergeant Francis Miller, Flint PD. Redacted. At approximately 4:15 p.m., January 26, 1977, Sergeant Francis Miller interviewed one redacted of Redacted in the Juvenile Bureau with the consent of Mrs. Bowman. At this time, Redacted related that he knew both Greg Green and Chris Bush. He knew Chris Bush for a few weeks, about 2 months ago. On a Saturday, the first part of the summer of 1976, Greg Green and Chris Bush came to his house about 4:15 p.m. Chris came to the door and told him Greg was outside and he wanted to see him, so Redacted went out. Greg was driving a blue Vega with a white interior with a white stripe on the side. Redacted stated he got in the car in the back seat. Chris got in the back seat with him, and Greg was in the driver's seat. Redacted asked where they were going, and they said they were going out by Dixie Highway and by the field on the dirt road. They didn't tell him why they were going out there, but Redacted stated he knew why, because the only time they come over is when they like you. Greg drove the car out there as Chris told him where to go. They went down Dixie Highway to a dirt road by a hotel by the lake, and Chris told Greg to turn, and they drove for about a half hour, riding around on the dirt road. Then Chris said to stop, and Greg stopped the car. After they stopped, they were laughing and talking, and Chris asked if he, Redacted, wanted to go walking around, and Redacted said no. Chris told Redacted he didn't have to go. Redacted stated he didn't want to get out of the car because Chris might molest him or kill him. He stated he was afraid. He stated he thought they might molest or kill him because it was out in the woods and on a dirt street and nobody around. He stated he was afraid of them because they were homosexuals. Chris asked Redacted to pull down his pants, and Redacted asked him what for. Chris said, "I want to suck your dick," and Redacted went along with this. Redacted, this was for about 15 minutes. Chris then had Redacted commit an oral copulation on him. Redacted stated Chris had done this about 3 times before to him. Redacted stated he had just turned 13 years old the first time, and his birthday is Redacted. He met Chris through Greg Green when Greg brought Chris over to Redacted's house. He met Greg Green last summer, and he owned a 1970 Impala, a gray-colored one. Greg picked Redacted up when he was hitchhiking with Redacted. Greg, on this date, talked about sexual acts to both Redacted, but they decided not to, as Greg suggested at this time. One night, Redacted, Greg, long Redacted, and Greg bought beer. Redacted stated he didn't drink any, but Redacted got drunk, and that was when it all started with Greg. Redacted stated that Greg has had sexual acts with him about 4 or 5 times. He stated Greg lives on Redacted. Stated he saw Greg commit sexual acts on Redacted in the back seat while at the drive-in. On one occasion, Greg Green picked Redacted up in his van. Redacted stated Greg bought 2 bottles of wine and asked Redacted if he wanted some and declined. Greg got drunk after drinking the wine and drove the van behind the roller haven on Saginaw Street. Greg turned off the lights and locked the van doors, closed the curtains in the van, and started talking with Redacted. Greg asked Redacted if he could suck his dick, and Redacted asked him if he'd let him, would he take him right home, and Greg agreed. During the oral copulation, Greg grabbed Redacted by the neck and started choking him until he passed out. Greg later returned Redacted to his home. Redacted stated this van was a 1974 Chevrolet, brown in color. Redacted stated that Chris Bush has had sexual acts with him about 3 times. These acts occurred in Chris's car in a field up by Northwestern High School where the motorcycle trails are at. Redacted stated that Greg Green forced him to have anal intercourse. He stated Greg has done this to him once. This occurred when Redacted spent the night at Greg's house. Redacted stated that Greg had told him that Chris Bush had killed one kid out in the woods up by Chris's house a couple of years ago. Greg had told him this last spring. Redacted stated that Chris has never forced him to do any of the things. He did them on his own. Citation 208 is the obituary for H. Lee Bush from the Detroit Free Press, July 31st, 2002. H. Lee, age 90, of Essex Meadows, Connecticut, died Tuesday at home. He was the husband of Elsie Bush. He was born in Hillsdale, Michigan on April 6, 1912, son of the late Charles and Lida Schulte Bush. He received a master's degree from Michigan State University. He was an executive financial director in Europe and the USA for General Motors for 40 years. He was a member of the Senior Men's Club in Birmingham, Michigan, where he lived for many years before moving to Essex, Connecticut 5 months ago. Besides his wife, he's survived by his son Charles Bush of Haddam Neck, Connecticut, 3 grandchildren, Alexander Bush, Scott Bush, and Brent Bush, also a great-granddaughter, Samantha Bush. He was predeceased by 3 sons, John, Christopher, and David. A memorial service will be held on Tuesday, 11 a.m. at the Kirk in the Hills Church, 1340 West Long Lake Road, Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Contributions in his memory may be made to the Kirk in the Hills Church. The Robinson Wright and Waymer Funeral Home, 34 Main Street, Centerbrook, Connecticut, is in charge of arrangements. Citation 209 is the FBI report on the interview with Charles Nels Bush from April 22, 2008. Charles Nels Bush is one of the older brothers of Christopher Bush. Charles advised that Chris was born in Pontiac, Michigan, and prior to the age of 10 had lived in Rochester, New York, Short Hills, New Jersey, and Germany, in that order. These were all family moves pertaining to their father's career at General Motors. By age 10, Chris was living in Germany and attending the first grade. While their family was settled in Germany, both Charles and Chris attended a grade school and high school at a boarding school in Switzerland called La Rosie. After his graduation from La Rosie, completion of the 12th grade, Chris stayed at La Rosie as an instructor. Chris then returned to the United States and attended Wayne State University, which was associated with Frank Sheldon, in Detroit for 1 year. Chris then transferred to a culinary institute in Midland, Michigan, from which he eventually graduated. After this, Chris worked as a chef at a retirement community in the Detroit area for approximately 1 year. After this, Chris, with the financial assistance of his father, opened his own restaurant in Alma, Michigan, called The Scotsman. During the time period Chris was operating this restaurant, which Charles advised was in Chris's mid to late 20s. Chris was arrested for molesting a boy in Birmingham, Michigan. This boy, the complainant or victim in the molestation case, had been mentored by Chris in the Big Brother program, a program Chris had become involved in. Charles believes that Chris also knew this boy's mother and that she possibly worked as a cashier at the Fisher's Meat Market in Birmingham, Michigan. This report, by the way, comes courtesy of Simon Dovey's personal website, the Hotstar. 2 more portions of this report I wanted to add. These are not cited by Dovey, but I think they're so significant in what they reveal, I wanted to feature them here. So at this point in the interview, Charles is basically requesting that a series of wishes be granted to him for him to then cooperate in giving over his DNA to the police. And one of the wishes that he's requesting is very telling here. So Bush was cooperative during his interview, but indicated his anxiety and apprehension toward any recall of his brother Chris Bush's suicide, and any involvement Chris would have had in the captioned investigation. Bush requested that the following be executed should positive results be obtained with his DNA, and or any public announcement naming Chris Bush as the Oakland County child killer. Number 1, direct notification to him and his wife prior to this announcement. Number 2, the utilization of Detroit victim witness personnel to the survivors of his brother John Bush, who currently reside in Michigan. So what he's saying here is, so basically, John Bush, who was another older brother of Chris, it was revealed later that both of his sons are believed to have also been molested by Chris. And Charles here is, in one of his requests, is that these survivors, the sons of John Bush, go into the Witness Protection Program. Yeah. And this was also very telling from the same report. At one point, it's noted that Charles advised that his family never talked about the Oakland County child killing case or whether Chris could have been involved. Charles advised that later in life, his father shredded all of the family documents to include birth certificates, which Charles stated was strange. Strange indeed. Citation 210 is the case notes of Detective Corey Williams. This is from June 30th, 2009. Interview of Detective Tom Waldron, Flint Police Department. I went to interview Tom Waldron today about Bush and Green back in 1977. Gary Gray went along and took the notes. Waldron remembered the case involving Chris Bush and Greg Green very well and said he and others were flattened when Cabot passed to them on the polygraph in regards to the OCCK case. Waldron said he couldn't believe it and said he and the others all thought for sure they were the guys involved in the child killings. Waldron said that he remembers that Deputy Oakland County Prosecutor Dick Thompson came up to Flint in a snowstorm that day. Waldron added that Thompson was a bigwig in Oakland County and would not have come up there if they didn't think they had the killers. I asked Waldron what he thought when I told him that Bush and Green should not have passed the polygraph. Waldron was shaken by this, hung his head, and said this should have been solved 32 years ago. He stated that Bush and Green met each other in a bar in Oakland County, which would have been early in 1976, stating further that this is when they probably discussed their common interest in children. Waldron told us that Bush and Green were into exchanging kids and would meet at a gravel pit in Holly, Michigan, northern Oakland County, to swap the kids. He said that Green would bring a boy from Flint and Bush would bring one from who knows where. Waldron said that this gravel pit is in the same area in Holly that they brought Bowman when they molested him. In fact, Bowman was the one that pointed out the gravel pit to Waldron. Waldron told us that Bowman was a kid that Bush and Green could really push around, stating that Green had choked Bowman to near death in the past when he wasn't cooperating. Waldron started talking about when he and a couple other detectives drove to Alma to arrest Chris Bush. Waldron talked about Bush owning and operating a restaurant in Alma that was purchased by his father, H. Lee Bush. He said that after they arrested Bush, they searched his house and found ropes, shotguns, marijuana, and a suitcase with child pornography. Waldron described the pornography as being 8 to 10 8mm type homemade movies involving children having sex in a tent in a wooded area. Waldron said that you could see the arm of an adult male in the movie directing the kids on what to do sexually because they didn't know. He stated that this suitcase also contained commercially produced child porn magazines, photos, and movies. Waldron said that this property was all confiscated and brought to the Flint Police Department as part of their case. He went on to say that he remembers at some point in February or March of 1977, the FBI came and picked up the suitcase of pornography to analyze the victims involved. Citation 212 is Southfield PD, City of Livonia Narrative Report, complaint number 7603079, Detective Lauren Doan, interview of Christopher Bush, January 28th, 1977. You see City of Livonia there, keep in mind, about 2 months, more or less, after this, Timothy King, final victim of the Oakland County child killings, will be found dead in Livonia. He admits he's a homosexual and strictly likes young boys 10 to 15 years old. He states approximately 1.5 years ago, he picked up a young boy at 9 Mile and Woodward in Ferndale. He stated he thinks he was 15 or 16 and did not know his name or remember what he was. And it kind of cuts off there. Could be wearing. He states he did not molest the boy, but dropped him off in Royal Oak near 13 Mile and Woodward. He states he comes down to the Detroit area to pick up young boys. This is Chris himself saying this. He states in approximately 1971 he was involved in the Big Brother program and had a little brother in Berkeley named Mike Boldiar, white male, 18 and then redacted, who lived in the 12 Mile and Greenfield area. He states he took him to Hartfield's bowling alley and also to the 7-Eleven store. He states he never sexually molested this boy. He states he's involved in the Big Brother program in Alma and was with the Big Brother in Midland. Officers advised him. Greg Green told these officers that he, Bush, had killed Stebbins. Officers told him Green had confronted him with this. Bush denied any involvement with Stebbins and stated Green had never confronted him about it. He states he and Green had discussed their sexual fantasies together, and they wanted to kidnap a young boy, tie him up, and sexually abuse him. One would get a job in the day and the other at night, so that one would be with him all the time. When asked what would happen when they were through with him, he would not answer. Citation 213. This is the Genesee County Jail inmate record, complaint number 30921, inmate number 7700487. Christopher Bush, released January 31st, 1977 at 2:05 p.m. So you can see here a very bizarre turn of events in that in this red box here you could see bond originally set for $75,000. This is when Chris is in jail. It is then suddenly reduced, you can see here, to $1,000, which is then quickly paid. So it's $75,000 to $1,000, which Daddy quickly pays for. Chris goes free January 31st. Flint men accused of sex with boys. The Lansing State Journal, February 18th, 1977. 4 Flint men have been charged with engaging more than 30 boys in oral sex and sodomy and photographing the acts, the Genesee County Prosecutor's Office announced. 3 of the men have been arrested on charges of first and third degree criminal sexual conduct, Prosecutor Robert F. Leonard said Thursday. A 4th is being sought on similar charges. The boys ranged in age from 10 to 14. The prosecutor refused to reveal the identities of the men. The prosecutor said an 8-week probe failed to turn up indications of an organized ring. Sure. But Leonard said some of the men knew each other and traded or referred the boys to other men. This is the very next day. 3 named in sex case, also from the Lansing State Journal, February 19th, 1977. The names of 3 of the 4 men charged with sexually exploiting 30 boys in a sex for favor scheme have been revealed by Genesee County authorities. The 4th man is being sought by police in the Akron, Ohio area. Genesee County authorities Friday released the names of 3 of the 4 men charged with sexually exploiting 30 boys in a sex for favor scheme. Genesee County Prosecutor Robert F. Leonard also said more arrests may result from the probe of alleged sexual abuse. Questioning of 10 more boys has begun in the case. The county prosecutor says the boys were involved in oral sex and sodomy. We're building more cases and there may be additional arrests, said Assistant Prosecutor Lenore Ferber. 3 of the men named in the case are Christopher Bush, Douglas Bennett, and Gregory Green. She said all were Flint area residents less than 35 years old. The 4th man named in a warrant is being sought by police in the Akron, Ohio area. The boys involved range from age 10 to 14. New sex charges filed in Oakland. The Detroit Free Press, March 1st, 1977. A Birmingham man is scheduled for arraignment Tuesday in 52nd District Court on charges that he allegedly had sexual relations with a 12-year-old boy in northern Oakland County. Christopher B. Bush, previously charged with 2 other men in similar cases, was arrested in the latest case Monday by Michigan State Police in Ionia. According to prosecutor L. Brooks Patterson, Bush met a boy in Genesee County and drove him to Grove Township in Oakland County, where the sexual acts allegedly occurred. Bush's arrest resulted from an Oakland County investigation into the kidnapping of 6 county youngsters in the past 13 months. Bush has been cleared in all 6 of the slayings. He is to be arraigned before District Judge Gerald E. McNally in the Oakland County case. He was released on $1,000 cash bond in Genesee County on the sex charges there. Jesus Christ. Bush is one of 3 men arrested by Flint police last month on other multiple charges of criminal sexual conduct involving young boys there. Bush and the other 2 men, both of Flint, allegedly used gifts, threats, and physical force to persuade 12 to 14-year-old boys to engage in sexual acts and lewd photography sessions. Of Corey Williams' interview of James Gunnels. And you mentioned something about he used or he may have used force with you. He tried to go anal on me. What was that? Was that at the house in Alpena? And that was at the house. And what happened there? I fought him off the best I could. He didn't penetrate me. He told me, now I'm screaming. I'm literally screaming, and that was the first time he had ever showed any kind of film footage of child molestations. I'm talking about a big screen rolled down on, the TV like a projector. Oh, you mean a movie screen? A movie screen. Something is unclear. Then a projector? Yeah, he had that, and he had the thing right there in the bedroom and dropped it down and started playing footage of, and these weren't adult films. These were kids being molested. Now, whether he was the person in it, I can't remember. I was so freaked out about the whole thing, and I was, of course, again, stoned. Had kids being molested by adults? Yes. In the movie? Yes. Okay. And it was I can't remember if he was the person in it or if there was another person, or you remember the victims, children, were they boys or girls or boys? Just boys? Yep. They like a homemade movies? Yeah. Those type? Yeah, but it was a film like 8mm. James Gunnell says something unclear. Gary Gray says something unclear. Then this is jumping forward a little bit. Okay, so did he ever, I don't know if I asked you this, were any of the kids in the movie, do you remember, were they tied up? Yeah, they were. That's what freaked me out about it, man. I mean, I remember running out in the living room, getting away, literally he was trying to do anal, okay? Okay, I actually want to take a brief pause here to address something incredibly important. As was just previously shown, I am not at the moment able to obtain the source for citation 217, which is Marney Rich Keenan's book, The Snow Killings. This cannot just be brushed over, though, because this particular citation is an incredibly important aspect of this entire thing, because it entails a statement that Corey Williams made about a very clear, direct tie between Francis Sheldon and Christopher Bush. That quote, I am almost positive it also exists in a few other places besides Keenan's work. I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty confident it is somewhere in Corey Williams' case notes and is also somewhere on Kathy Broad's blog. At the time of recording this, I've not been able to obtain that, and I've not been able to obtain Keenan's book, which it is featured in. But this is so important that what I want to do here is just read off the actual quote from Keenan's book as Dovey outlines in Eye of the Chickenhawk. And then to kind of make up for that, I want to just go through a few other things. These are not cited in Eye of the Chickenhawk, but I want to go through a few other things here that kind of allude to this Sheldon-Bush connection, just to kind of make up for that. But for starters, this is on page 91 of Eye of the Chickenhawk. Dovey writes, a detective named Corey Williams, who would later head up a cold case investigation into the OCCK murders, would state of his findings, I know Bush's name was on a ledger filled with Francis Sheldon's child porn customers, and I have no doubt Bush and Sheldon knew each other. So, Williams, who, for the vast majority of the case in this entire thing, is a very upstanding guy and trustworthy source with this, is outright telling Keenan, presumably telling Keenan, unless this is in another context in the book, that he actually saw Christopher's name on the ledger of Frank Sheldon's child porn customers. And so that quote was from the Keenan book. That is absolutely a fact. It is absolutely the case. I just, at this time, don't have anything to show actually on screen from the sources for that quote, though it does exist in, like I said, a few different capacities, I believe. But I'm going to go through a couple of these things. Again, these are not cited by Dovey, but I'm going to go through a couple of these just to allude to that connection more. Meeting about information Lawson provided to investigators in 1988. Today I met with John Owlett from the FBI to discuss some new information that Owlett had found in the FBI files that relate to the Lawson-Moore-Lamborghini investigation. Present at this meeting was John and I, Gary Gray, Dave Robertson, and Ray Anger from Berkeley PD. John found a report that had been written by Detective Stutt from the Birmingham Police Department back in 1988. This report showed that Barry King, Timothy King's father, had been contacted by Richard Lawson via telephone from the Macomb County Jail in 1988. Lawson was awaiting trial on a 4-count CSC, child under 13 case, at the time. Lawson told Mr. King that he knew who killed his son. Detective Stutt, Detective Duncan, and Barry King went to the Macomb County Jail and interviewed Richard Lawson. During this interview, Lawson described a subject named Sheldon and 3 unnamed subjects as having been involved in a child pornography ring in the Cass Corridor in the mid to late 70s. Lawson also stated that these subjects were also involved in the OCCK case. So, by subjects, he's talking about Sheldon and these 3 unnamed subjects. Lawson stated that the King boy was also possibly filmed by these subjects before he was killed. This report contained information from Lawson that mirrors the information that I have gathered over the past 10 months in this case, minus the names. Lawson called these suspects numbers 1, 2, and 3 and gave descriptions to detectives during this 1988 interview. These descriptions given by Lawson for 2 and 3 matched Bob Moore and Ted Lamborghini, aka Ted Orr. The subject called number 1 by Lawson has not been identified. Lawson then asked for immunity on over 20 years of pedophilia by him. Lawson's CSC case was dismissed and this information was never followed up on. A subject named George McMahon was also mentioned in this report as being associated with this child pornography ring and having been a supplier of children to Bob Moore for filming. Lawson said in this interview that he didn't think that George McMahon had anything to do with the King killing. Here is case notes again from February 2nd, 2006. Offer discussed with Lawson for the first time. The pretrial motions in Lawson's murder case were heard today in front of Judge Michael Hathaway at the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice. Most of the motions were decided today in favor of the prosecution, including the Walker hearing. Gary Gray and Dave Robertson came down to the courthouse today to meet with me to approach Lawson. We approached Lawson and his attorney, Jim O'Donnell, today with our offer to have Lawson plead guilty to second-degree murder in the pending Giller case, cooperate in the Oakland County child killing investigation in exchange for immunity from prosecution in the OCCK case, enter the witness protection program, so that pops up again here. Protection from what exactly? I mean, that's the interesting kind of angle with that. And eventually be housed in a federal prison of his choosing, anywhere in the U.S. The offer was discussed and authorized by Kim Worthy of the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office and was in agreement with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Michigan Department of State Police. Lawson's reaction at first was to ask if this offer would be available to him after the Giller trial, indicating that he thought he would be acquitted. I told him that this is a one-time offer and that he could have a few days to think about it, but that this offer will not be available to him once we go to trial or after the trial. I also told Lawson that this would not be a situation where he can call me from prison and ask if he can still cooperate. I told Lawson that we are confident that we will convict him in his pending murder case. I told Lawson that we have been investigating his information about the OCCK case for approximately the past year, and told him that we talked to Ted in Ohio. Richard asked me what his name was, to which I stated Ted Lamborghini. I told Richard that we have talked to hundreds of people in this case, and that we identified the people that he called number 1, number 2, number 3 in the report from detectives during his 1988 interview at the Macomb County Jail. Richard said he didn't know what else he could tell us. I indicated to Richard that we have put most of the puzzle put together, but we need him to fill in a couple pieces to complete the puzzle. I told Richard that we know Frank Sheldon. Lawson asked me, "Who did you just say?" I told him, "You know, the millionaire guy that owned the island," to which he said, "Oh yes, right." Richard asked me if we had talked to Bob Moore, to which I stated to Lawson, "You know he's been dead for years, Richard." I mentioned that we have talked to some of the men that were young boys back in the 70s, such as Michael Redacted, Donnie Redacted, and the Redacted boys. We ended the conversation telling Richard to take a day or two to think about our offer and talk it over with his attorney, Mr. O'Donnell. Oakland County child killer murders a pedophile ring up north, and unanswered questions 50 years later, from Fox 2 Detroit from March 5, 2026. Hundreds of miles from Oakland County sits North Fox Island. While not near the scene of the crimes, its connections to some of the men suspected in the murders continue to catch the attention of investigators. The island off of Grand Traverse Bay was owned by Francis Sheldon, a wealthy businessman who ran a boys' camp on the island called Brother Paul's Nature Center. Investigators say this was actually a child porn operation. The link to Oakland County? Bush was a friend and customer of Sheldon, according to investigators. And then just to drive the point home one more time, I want to repeat the quote from Corey Williams that is in Marney Rich Keenan's work and is quoted in I Had the Chickenhawk, page 91. And that is, "I know Bush's name was on a ledger filled with Francis Sheldon's child porn customers, and I have no doubt Bush and Sheldon knew each other." Legislator to sponsor outlawing child porn. The Traverse City Record, March 12, 1977. State police seized 18 rolls of film from a Marine City man who was named in the corporation papers of Brother Paul's Children's Mission, an alleged homosexual pornography ring involving young boys in Port Huron and on North Fox Island off Grand Traverse Bay. Photographs allegedly taken on the island have been reproduced in hardcore pornographic magazines, police said earlier. Two principals of Brother Paul's, Francis D. Sheldon and Dyer Grossman, are still being sought by state and federal authorities on criminal sexual conduct charges. Flint police also confiscated 8 rolls of film from Christopher Bush, 25, of Birmingham, one of 3 men arrested and charged with criminal sexual conduct involving 10 to 14-year-old boys. Police there say as many as 50 youths could be involved. Oakland County link probed in sexual exploiting of boys. The Detroit News, February 22, 1977. Genesee County Prosecutor Robert F. Leonard said yesterday the defendants may have passed boys from one to another, and the scheme may have had nationwide ties. He said his office is investigating the possibility the defendants may have been linked to Grosse Pointe multimillionaire Francis D. Sheldon, missing since allegations that his youth camp on a Lake Michigan island near Traverse City was a homosexual haven became public last year. Bush is free on $1,000 cash bond, while Bennett and Green are in Genesee County Jail in lieu of $15,000 and $75,000 bonds, respectively. Citation 218 is letter from Robert F. Leonard, prosecuting attorney of Genesee County, to Benjamin Civiletti, the Assistant U.S. Attorney General, from March 4, 1977. This comes from page 78 of Sexual Exploitation of Children, the hearings before the Subcommittee on Crime of the Committee on the Judiciary, House of Representatives, 95th Congress, First Session, Sexual Exploitation of Children, May the 23rd and 25th, June 10th and September 20th of 1977. To Mr. Benjamin Civiletti. Dear Mr. Civiletti, just a note to express my appreciation to you and your staff for the courtesies extended us when we met with the Attorney General and you in your offices on Friday. I believe such frank exchange of ideas will be beneficial for all. As I mentioned to you on the phone yesterday, the National District Attorneys Association is anxious to develop a close working relationship with your department and to meet with you and to get some insights on your thoughts and philosophy on the problems of the criminal justice system. Since it is impossible for you to attend the San Diego conference this month, hopefully you will be able to attend our spring Board of Directors meeting in Chicago, May 11th to 13th, at the Continental Plaza. If this is possible, we would be happy to make accommodations for you at the hotel. There are approximately 75 board members and about 60 to 65 generally attend. Also pursuant to our phone conversation, I would like to briefly expand on the matter of sexual child abuse. The problem appears to be national in scope, and obviously its implications are tragic. It involves primarily children between ages 5 to 15 being sexually abused by adults. It seems there may very well be a national conspiracy made up of an interrelating network of foster homes, churches, nature groups, and other similar programs ostensibly set up to handle wayward, incorrigible, homeless youngsters. These groups are not always tied together by any common denominator other than many have the same MO or the same organizer. Someone that needs investigation is a person by the name of Dyer Grossman, who it appears goes from state to state setting up these organizations and in some cases affiliating with a New Jersey church under circumstances which avoid any scrutiny by the IRS. These phony organizations are established in such a way as to be the conduit to accumulate youngsters to be used in making porno films and being available for sexual activities with adult perverts. Some of the expenditures for these youngsters are unknowingly being provided by public funding. These programs are being stocked with young children by overburdened courts, insensitive parents, and in some cases well-meaning officials. Once the youngster is placed in the program, whether Michigan, Tennessee, Louisiana, or any other state, he is trapped and becomes the easy prey for the sexual deviants who in most cases are running the programs. It's an interesting choice of 3 states there. These adult perverts appear to be aware of the network and travel between states attending these camps and sexually abusing these children for money, usually paid to the camp officials. Many of these people involved in this type of activity are very wealthy individuals, and some are respectable community leaders in their hometowns. Citation 219 is letter from prosecuting attorney, Genesee County, Michigan, Robert F. Leonard, to David F. Tibbetts, April 6, 1977. Dear Mr. Tibbetts, several police agencies and prosecutors' offices in Michigan are conducting ongoing investigations into the sexual abuse and commercial exploitation of children similar to the investigation my office is conducting in Genesee County. I'm sure you found, as we did, that this tragic problem is acute and widespread, reaching across city, county, and state lines. Our targets appear to be organized and interconnected. Effective investigation requires the highest degree of cooperation and information sharing among enforcement agencies. Towards that end, I have scheduled a meeting to be held on Monday, April 11th, 1977, at 2:00 p.m. in the Genesee County Courthouse, Saginaw, at 5th Street, Flint, Michigan. Enclosed, please find a map. The meeting is open to all interested prosecutors and police agencies. I would encourage you to extend invitations to any appropriate participants, keeping in mind the sensitive and confidential nature of the matters to be discussed. Enclosed also is a tentative agenda for the meeting. It is a rough guide only. It is not meant to limit discussion of any issues whatever. If you are unable to attend but wish to be apprised of the substance of that meeting, please contact Assistant Prosecutor Lenore M. Ferber. And then this is the tentative agenda lineup for that meeting, which never happened. Sexual abuse and commercial exploitation of children. Exchange of information on current investigations. Identification of individuals, victims, potential defendants. Exchange of photographs. National conspiracy and its effect on Michigan. Establishing statewide organization. Pending and or proposed legislation. National District Attorneys Association involvement. Civic organizations vulnerable to infiltration. Citation 220 is a statement by Robert F. Leonard. We're here today to address a problem that was virtually unrecognized as recently as 6 or 8 months ago. The problem of sexual abuse of children has long plagued our society. Such offenses have proven difficult for law enforcement because of an inability to detect the crime, where many perpetrators are for the most part relatives and friends and youth workers with ulterior motives, and where the victims do not or cannot complain to someone who will listen. If complaints about such offenses are made, the child very often will ultimately yield to family pressure to cover up the embarrassing abuse, or the victim's fragile memories and childlike perceptions often preclude successful prosecution. Recently, reports of sexual abuse of children have come from widely scattered points across the country, and information gathered by investigating these incidents. Wow, I don't know why I had so much trouble with that. Incidents has made it apparent there is a new and pernicious dimension to an already grave problem. Abuse for profit is manifested in child prostitution and kiddie porn, and has created a multi-million-dollar industry built on the physical and psychological brutalization of thousands of our young citizens. Pornography should not be the major focus of our concern. It is brutalization of our children suffering perverted physical and psychological abuse that has brought us here today. And the reading and viewing material depleting such acts is but a spin-off of the underlying victimization. The tentacles of this illegal activity from an underground network reaching from New York to California and Michigan to Louisiana. Prosecutors in cities across the country have uncovered and compiled information pointing to a high degree of exchange and communications among those who prey on our children. Seemingly isolated cases of such deviancy reveal a frightening set of sophisticated intercommunications upon closer scrutiny. Please permit me to review a few of the more recent headline stories. A Michigan scoutmaster, once employed as a scouting executive, is charged with criminal sexual conduct stemming from incidents with young boys. 4 Michigan men are arrested separately for sexual exploitation and pandering of more than 30 boys between the ages of 10 and 14. While not an organized ring, they informally exchange victims or names, and the number of boys involved may ultimately range to as many as 300. 6 adult men are charged in Illinois for running a nationwide organization alleged to use camps and churches as vehicles for luring runaway youths into becoming male prostitutes to serve wealthy homosexuals. 2 Illinois men are picked up for allegedly using 2 14-year-old boys in a pornographic movie which they plan to distribute across the country. New Orleans police arrest a probation officer and foster father of 2 state wards for aggravated rape and aggravated crimes against nature on 8 to 12-year-old boys. He is also a former scout troop leader. An Episcopal priest is under arrest in Tennessee on 16 separate counts involving child abuse and pornography at the boys' farm he directs, where he receives wards of the Tennessee courts. The operator of a Michigan nature camp for boys is now serving time in prison for criminal sexual conduct with a 10-year-old boy. That's Gerald Richards. A Michigan philanthropist is being sought on state and federal charges for 2 counts of criminal sexual conduct involving 8 and 14-year-old boys, which took place on an island he owns and for which a nature camp was planned. That's Frank Sheldon. The New Jersey Church purportedly functions as the front for boy lover movement publications. Many of these people and organizations interrelate through the exchange of information and even the exchange of the child victims themselves. Just take a wild guess what happens to Mr. Leonard. This is citation 221, Genesee prosecutor's staff questioned. The Times-Herald, February 18, 1978. Staff members in the Genesee County Prosecutor's Office were hauled this week in front of a federal grand jury investigating their boss, Prosecutor Robert F. Leonard, sources in Detroit reported Friday. The probe focuses on use of an informant's fund in the prosecutor's office, which Genesee County records show has paid out $500,000 in public funds in the past 10 years. It was set up in 1967 to pay informants in return for tips on criminal activity. The sources in Detroit confirmed a report in the Flint Journal that investigators and other staff members on Leonard's staff were subpoenaed and appeared before the grand jury. The investigators work in the prosecutor's organized crime unit and use the informant's fund. County officials confirmed federal investigators transported records relating to the informant's fund from the county controller's office to Detroit. Leonard acknowledged last October he was the target of a federal grand jury investigation of his informant's fund. He was not immediately available for comment on the appearance of witnesses before the grand jury this week. He has said the probe was triggered by his political enemies in Genesee County, who have alleged in past campaigns for county prosecutor that Leonard misused money from the informant's fund. have a feeling his political enemies are a little bit more vast than he may think. Leonard is one of the targets in another federal grand jury probe involving the expungement of a bank robbery conviction against Mount Clemens businessman and gambling figure James Tammer. Citation 221. Leonard gets 5 years, fine. The Herald Palladium, February 26, 1980. Former Genesee County Prosecutor Robert F. Leonard has been sentenced to 5 years in prison and a $15,000 fine following his conviction on embezzling federal money from an office fund he established to pay informants in organized crime and narcotics cases. Leonard, 48, of Flint, could be paroled after, it's kind of dotted there, I think it's 20, could be 30, 20 months, Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Rossman said. U.S. District Judge Robert E. Damascio, Monday ordered Leonard to post $5,000 cash bond for his freedom while he appeals his conviction to the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati. Damascio also ordered Leonard to appear at a March 10 hearing to show cause why he should not be held in contempt for failing to comply with a November 1977 subpoena, ordering him to produce for a grand jury documents relating to the crime-fighting fund. I've concluded that it is very possible Leonard may find it more convenient not to appear on March 10th, although I recognize he has roots here, at least in Flint, said Damascio. Leonard's sentencing attorney, Clyde Pritchard, told the judge he would make no statement at Leonard's request. However, Pritchard objected to the cash bond, saying, "Mr. Leonard is absolutely out of funds." "Mr. Leonard is not going anywhere. He knows the law, and the idea of his running is absurd," Pritchard said later. I noticed the U.S. Attorney didn't seem concerned about bond. A judge convicted Leonard November 23rd on 4 counts of a 6-count grand jury indictment handed down in March. He forfeited his prosecutor's post, which he held for 16 years upon conviction. Jesus. Damascio sentenced Leonard to 5 years and a $5,000 fine for embezzling $34,000 in federal revenue sharing money from his informant's fund on July 20th, 1976, a 5-year prison term for transporting $33,450 in stolen money to California on July 29th, 1976 to help pay for a house, 5 years and a $5,000 fine for falsifying, concealing, and covering up his embezzlement, and 3 years and a $5,000 fine for filing a false statement on his income tax return on April 15, 1977. The prison terms are concurrent. So they needed to get poor Leonard out of the picture. Citation 222 is the report on Operation Burial Ritual, which was commenced on May 9, 1977, as part of the Oakland County Child Killing Task Force. Results. Number 1. After studying the pictures of the drop sites, Dr. Peebles indicated that it would appear they exemplified the Judeo-Christian traditional burial ritual. After studying the pictures of the bodies and reviewing the autopsy reports, the following commentary was made. A. There appears to be no specific ritual that would tie the homicides to any specific religious, cultural, or ethnic group. However, there were certain similarities and points worth noting. Number 1, one boy, Timothy King, and one girl, Jill Robinson, had red jackets on. Number 2, one boy, Mark Stebbins, and one girl, Christine Mihalik, had blue jackets. Number 3, all had shoulder-length hair. Number 4, all had fair complexion. Number 5, all had brown hair with what appeared to be red highlights. Number 6, the 4 victims were basically lookalikes in appearance. Number 7, this might lead one to the conclusion that the killer does select a specific target or victim. Weird pattern links deaths of children. The Detroit Free Press, March 24, 1977. The children in the apparently related cases all disappeared or found dead on days when it snowed, and although the killer murdered his first victim last February, he did not strike again until cold weather returned more than 10 months later. All the children were last seen within a mile of Woodward along a strip that runs from about 9 Mile in Ferndale to 15 Mile or Maple in Birmingham. While kept captive, police said, the children were fed and cared for. They were not killed until a few hours before the bodies were found. Shortly before they died, the killer either bathed them or made them bathe themselves. 2 of the children, Timothy King and Mark Stebbins, bore rope marks on their ankles and wrists. A psychological profile of the killer developed by police departments working on the murders said the killer is fanatically clean, bright, but sexually abnormal. Citation 223 is the case notes of Detective Corey Williams. This is the November 14th, 2007 entry. I had been meaning to take a look at Kent Schultz's CCH after his name jumped out at me on the list at MSP of those suspects that had taken and cleared a polygraph in regards to the Oakland County child killings back in the 1970s. Wasser had told me that the suspect in question, that had confessed to him about the child killings, had been brought to his, Wasser's, office by his attorney on a separate CSC case shortly after he had been cleared by MSP in the child killings. Kent Schultz CCH showed that he was arrested in Wayne County on October 27, 1977 for CSC and was found guilty in Third Circuit Court, sentenced to 5 to 15 years in the CSC case in April 1978. I called Dave Robertson and asked him when Schultz was polygraphed, which he stated that he was polygraphed in December of 1977 by examiner Romatowski, an MSP examiner, and cleared. Citation 224. Letter from Lieutenant Robert H. Robertson to Louis B. Sims, the Chief U.S. National Bureau at Interpol, December 12, 1977. Subject: Oakland County, Michigan child homicides. Dear Mr. Sims, we are concerned with the media's stories that children are being utilized in what is referred to as snuff-out pornography. These are films wherein the children is first sexually used and abused and then snuffed out, or killed as part of the final sexual act. These films are allegedly sent out of the country to be shown. Enclosed are pictures of the youngsters who have been killed in this area. We would like to request that they be distributed throughout your network with information on the aforementioned snuff-out pornography theory. Further, we would like to alert your field agents to be cognizant of these films and any child participants and victims of same. Again, thank you for your cooperation. Sincerely, Robert H. Robertson. Okay, now this is very interesting. Citation 225 is Mount Clemens Police Criminal Arrest Record, complaint number 262682, criminal file number 24572, Richard James McNamee? I think it's McNamee. Richard James McNamee was one of the responding police officers to the scene of what would shortly after be revealed to be Christopher Bush's quote-unquote suicide. Absolutely was not a suicide. He was very clearly killed. And one of the strange elements pointing toward that being the case is the fact that Christopher Bush's housemaid goes to Chris's house, the door is locked, she can't get in, she calls Christopher Bush's brother Charles, who eventually calls the police, and of all people who arrive, it's a officer who shortly after in 1982 would be charged for criminal sexual conduct against a minor. And so you can see this is the date of arrest. You can see his name up there. The date of arrest, I believe that's April, it's 14th or 15th. It looks like it was 15th and they changed it for 14. 1982, time of arrest. Charge, criminal sexual conduct. Date of offense, April 14th, 1982. Then it gives all of his other information. Very, very strange. Citation 227 is the Oakland County crime scene case files on Christopher Bush's supposed suicide. This comes from the Hotstar website. We're just going to run through a little bit of this kind of picture build off of this. Evidence seized from the scene of the suicide: 1 .22 caliber shell case from the bedroom floor near the bed. 22 caliber shell case from the rifle. The shell case was caught by the bolt in front chamber, did not eject from the rifle. 22 cal shell case from the top of desk in bedroom. 22 cal shell case from the waste basket in bedroom. 1 fired bullet removed from the brain of the victim by Dr. Sillery, who is a very shady character. That's a tale for another time, but very, very shady character. They take latent prints that were on a Crown Russ bottle. Christopher Bush's prints. Bush was apparently drinking very heavily at the time. One latent print from the Federal 22 cal cartridge box has been identified as being made by the number 3, the right middle finger of Christopher Bush. Type of crime, suicide. Detail, subject was lying in bed, shot himself once in the head with a 22 caliber rifle. Body found several days later. Photos were taken, several items brought to station for further investigation, including rifle, 3 spent casings, 1 box of bullets, a vodka bottle, a cassette tape cartridges, that's interesting, several pieces of rope, a drawing, and some miscellaneous papers. A very small quantity of marijuana was found and was destroyed. Okay. This is about some more of the evidence received. Cotton swabs on Christopher Bush's body and the cartridge case. Okay, this is very bizarre here. Results, levels of antimony, I'm not sure, found in items 2 through 5, which are swabs, were insufficient to indicate the presence of gunshot residue. Therefore, no testing for barium was conducted. So they can't for sure say that there was gunshot residue on this person who supposedly shot himself directly in the head with a rifle laying in bed. From these findings, no conclusion can be made as to whether the subject did or did not handle or discharge a firearm. This is a repeat. More repeat. Christopher Bush, date of death November 20th, 1978, 9:30 a.m. Cause of death, gunshot wound to the head. Manner of death, suicide. Laboratory findings was he had a blood alcohol level of 0.41%, which is extremely high. Some pictures of, this is a picture of Christopher Bush. These are a picture of these ropes, like binding ropes that they found. And very disturbingly here, this is a picture they found at the scene of a pencil sketch drawing of a screaming little boy wearing a parka who eerily resembles Mark Stebbins, who was the first victim of the killings. More pictures of the ropes there. Evidence received, removed from evidence locker, December 12th, 1978. Number 1, box containing a drawing of a child in a parka and numerous ropes and cordage. No question ropes or cordage were recovered from the victims of any of the 4 homicides under investigation by the Oakland County Task Force. Therefore, no comparisons can be made. The thing with this, though, is that, and adding to the strangeness, is how the scene of this supposed suicide is like this all-encompassing convenience, basically, for dissolving the investigation, which would happen immediately after this took place. You have every element here. You have basically the appearance of Stebbins himself at the scene. You have, the victims had marks on them that looked as if they had been restrained by ropes. You have the ropes. And the investigation would indeed be dissolved immediately after. This is citation 228. Oakland Child Slayer Squad will quit without a suspect. The Detroit Free Press, November 21st, 1978. So this is quite literally one day after Bush's supposed suicide. A $1 million specially created police task force designed to find the killer of 4 Oakland County children in 1976 and 1977 will shut down next month after almost 2 years of digging without finding a single good suspect in the case. The investigation, one of the widest in modern Michigan history, involved interviews with hundreds of people and the cataloging of nearly 14,000 tips since the murder spree apparently ended with the March 1977 death of Timothy King, 11, of Birmingham. But the task force director, State Police Lieutenant Robert Robertson, said in an interview last week that detectives never came up with a name, a suspect I was satisfied with. Robertson, a lanky 45-year-old district commander reassigned to the special task force, has been saying for months he believes the police have failed to catch the killer so far because the murderer is dead, in prison, this is very interesting here, or being treated in a mental institution. To add that in as an option is just bizarre. Like the concept that he would, in real time at that moment, just be in a mental institution. And the insinuation with that, and there's other articles where it alludes to this, is the idea of Bush's extremely rich family basically paying to have him taken out of society and put into some lavish, mental institution, mental recovery place. And for that to basically function as the resolution to this entire thing. Robertson said in the interview that the investigation also suffered for lack of significant eyewitnesses, and added that the killer's motive remains a mystery. This has been an extremely difficult case, Robertson said. We can ask questions all day long and not get any answers. Obviously, if he kept killing, we could catch him, but no one wants to sacrifice another child. Citation 229. Livonia cops make arrest in 1989 driveway slaying. The Detroit Free Press, February 23, 2005. When Livonia Police Detective Sergeant Corey Williams and Ronald McPhee surprised Richard Lawson at a federal probation office in San Diego last month, they had something they hoped would make closing their 15-year-old murder case a little easier. They had a bottle of water for Lawson. He'd probably get thirsty talking about the rainy night of June 19, 1989, when his old boss, Xavier Giller, took a shotgun blast to the chest. Extradited from California, Lawson, 58, is set to be arraigned on first-degree murder and armed robbery charges today in Livonia's 16th District Court. The police investigation of Giller's death fills 3 banker's boxes and stretches from the comfortable suburbs through Detroit's Cass Corridor and fearfully shared jailhouse secrets. Even as the police worked the case, Giller's family pushed on their own. I hired 2 private eyes to chase down leads that didn't go anywhere, and I just kept trying to think what Pops would have done, said Victor Giller, 52. He and his sister, Bonnie Swabada, 36, knew their dad would have gone through brick walls for them. The man people called Big John was no cupcake. His wife Catherine said he'd run away to Detroit as a kid from Middleton, north of Lansing, to escape a brutal stepfather. He'd hid in a coal bin. Giller started out driving a cab in the 1940s and wound up owning the Greater Detroit Cab Company, as well as a bar and apartment building in the Cass Corridor. He was shot in a 1973 holdup and again in the mid-80s by a disturbed driver. In the fatal robbery, Giller was able to pull a pistol and fire a shot. Giller was a tough old hombre, Robert Barnes, executive director of the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Association, said after the killing. Hard work earned Giller a custom home on 6 acres surrounded by a high fence on 7 Mile near Hamburg Road in Livonia. Citation 230. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 9, 2006. Narrative about Lawson's phone calls from the Wayne County Jail. I listened to Lawson's phone calls today that he made from the Wayne County Jail over the past year. The calls to the number 313-832-2413 were determined to probably be a fellow inmate that was using Lawson's PIN/inmate number 55790 to make calls. Richard also made 16 phone calls between March 10, 2005 and February 6, 2006 to Shane Liddick from the San Diego City Beat magazine. Liddick wrote a story about Lawson's involvement in illegal alien smuggling over the U.S.-Mexican border that was called A Smuggler's Life and was published in the April 2005 issue. Shane Liddick won an Excellence in Journalism Award for this article. I learned from Lawson's phone conversations with Liddick that is also writing a book about Lawson's life and could hear Liddick striking the keys of his computer keyboard while Lawson talked to him. During their conversation on March 28, 2005, Lawson told Liddick that the police were pumping him for information about the newly reopened Oakland County child killer investigation. Liddick asked Lawson why the police would be asking him about it, to which Lawson began to talk about his involvement as an informant for several different agencies, including DPD and FBI, during the original investigation 30-some years ago. Lawson went on to say that the police want the information about the case, but that he has been holding back, of course, on giving them information unless they can provide him with consideration and immunity in certain cases, and it would have to be in writing. I listened to a conversation between Lawson and Liddick that took place on February 4th, 2006, in which Lawson was telling Liddick about the offer we made to him in court the other day. Lawson embellished the story to Liddick, stating that several FBI agents and state police officers, along with the Livonia police, approached him with this offer. Lawson went on to say that he wasn't sure what they were after, stating that he didn't understand why he would need the Federal Witness Protection Program, saying that he didn't know who we were trying to protect him from. Lawson went on to tell Liddick that he thinks that the case against him in the Giller murder is weak, and that is why we are offering him the opportunity to plead a second-degree murder. Lawson is obviously in the trial mode right now, so we will wait and concentrate on convicting him of first-degree murder and then see where his mindset is on cooperation in the Oakland County child killing case. Citation 231 is a repeat. We covered June 2nd, 2005, that entry of case notes previously. It pops back up here again. So, yeah, it's the June 2nd, 2005 entry of the case notes of Detective Corey Williams. I interviewed Isaiah Ike McKinnon today, the ex-chief of police in Detroit, about Richard Lawson. Lawson had stated during earlier interviews that he had worked as an informant for Ike during the original OCCK investigation. Chief McKinnon told me that he was in charge of the Detroit Police Sex Crimes Unit at that time, and they were working on the child killing case. I was expecting Ike to say that Richard is not a credible person, don't believe anything he says, but McKinnon had the opposite to say about Lawson. He said that Richard is a full-blown pedophile, was an excellent snitch, and helped his crew arrest over 20 pedophiles working the Woodward and 6 Mile area at the time of the OCCK investigation in an attempt to locate the child killer. Ike said that Richard is long-winded, but that if I can get him to open up about his pedophilia and past criminal activity, that Lawson would be a wealth of information and may help close unsolved crimes, including murders. The chief went on to say that they used Lawson to teach officers about pedophiles and pedophilia, and that Lawson went on the news in the 1970s to give his opinion about the child killer. I asked Ike if he or anyone in his crew would have shown Lawson, or if Lawson would have had access to any photographs of the dead kids from the investigation, to which McKinnon stated absolutely not. Ike said that Richard was well connected in the pedophile network in several states and led his crew to a raid in Detroit that yielded files of thousands of pedophiles' names around the country. I asked McKinnon, knowing everything he now knows about Richard Lawson, would he put it past Lawson to have been involved in the Oakland County child killings, to which he stated absolutely not. McKinnon reiterated that if I can get Lawson talking, he would be a wealth of information, stating that Lawson was connected to and kept files on pedophiles in not only Detroit, but also places like Chicago, Indianapolis, New York, etc. I asked McKinnon about the David Schultz arrest, to which he said that when his crew arrested Schultz, they thought he was going to be the Oakland County child killer. McKinnon said that Lawson was the informant on the Schultz case. Schultz was then cleared in the OCCK case. Citation 232. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams, December 13th, 2005. I met with John Owlett today after having an opportunity the night before to read over all the new information on Sheldon, Goddick, and Filger. The only connection so far between Lawson and Francis Sheldon's pedophile ring is that Lawson talked about Sheldon financing the film of Timothy King, produced by Bob Moore. Lawson told detectives this during the interview in 1988, after he contacted Timothy King's father from the Macomb County Jail, stating that he knew who killed his son. John and I agree that the motive behind the kidnappings and killings was probably the money the suspects were getting for filming and selling the snuff films of these children. In 1979, Sheldon fled Michigan to Spain to avoid prosecution on 3 CSC counts of children under the age of 13. Sheldon transferred $2 million from his trust to an offshore account in the Virgin Islands. The money that was coming in producing child porn movies had probably dried up. Richard Lawson, Bob Moore, and Ted Lamborghini, aka Ted Orr, all parted ways. Ted moved to Cleveland. Richard no longer had the money to put into his Detroit rental homes and torched one for insurance money. Prior to this, according to Fay Redacted, Richard was putting money into his Detroit properties, fixing them up and selling them. Richard and Fay moved into Ted's apartment at Junction and Porter, and Ted would lend Richard money when Ted came into town from Cleveland. This is just a theory at this point, but it would explain why the kidnappings and killings stopped. Ted, Richard, and Bob never stopped molesting children. John Outlet and I are continuing to pore over the new information on Sheldon to look for other connections to the Cass Corridor pedophile ring. John is also going to check FBI files and databases for anything that would connect all the dots in this promising lead. John told me that he would contact their legal attaché in Amsterdam to ascertain whether or not the authorities there have any archives of tapes or movies obtained from Francis Sheldon during search warrants or after his death. Citation 233. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams, December 9th, 2005. In the report that John Outlet of the FBI found from the interview of Lawson in 1988, Lawson has said that a wealthy pedophile named Sheldon was the guy who financed the pornographic movies that Bob Moore was making in Detroit involving children. Lawson said that Sheldon owned an island in northern Michigan off the coast, in the Traverse City area, and fled the country, probably to Spain, and is still involved in child pornography internationally. This morning, Gary Gray called me and stated that a detective in the Traverse City area contacted him after the request, stating that Sheldon is Francis Duffield Sheldon, white male, born September 5, 1928. Gary then found a large MSP tip on Francis Sheldon that includes the information from Lawson about being wealthy, leaving the country to avoid prosecution, and being involved in the child pornography industry. Citation 234. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 15, 2006. Today we obtained a writ and took Richard Lawson out of the Wayne County Jail after he indicated that he wished to cooperate in the OCCK investigation in exchange for consideration in his case. We had a proffer statement down up by the prosecutor's office that contained the terms of the agreement. This proffer statement was approved by Kim Worthy, Rob Moran, and Lawson's attorneys. Lawson also agreed to the terms of the offer and signed the statement. Lawson understood that he had to give a complete debriefing about information he has on the OCCK case and be polygraphed about his personal involvement and/or information he has about the case. The interview of Lawson was conducted by Sergeant Williams, Gary Gray, and John Outlet. During the course of this lengthy interview with Lawson, it was determined that the only information Lawson might have that could assist the investigation is that he claims to have looked at 2 Polaroid photos of Timothy King alive, standing naked, and another adult male is standing in the photo with the King boy. Richard said that he was at Bob Moore's house at the time Ted Lamborghini showed him these photos, stating in a bragging kind of way, "Looks like the King kid." Richard said that Bob Moore became upset when he noticed Ted showing Richard these photos. Richard told detectives that he thought it looked like the King boy, but that he wasn't sure. See John Outlet's narrative of this interview for details. Richard will be polygraphed on February 16, 2006. Citation 235. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 16, 2006. We took Richard to his polygraph today at the Michigan State Police Post in Northville, Michigan. In the car, on the way from Wayne County Jail to the test, Lawson said that he had an opportunity to think last night and that he remembered the name of the subject he called number 1 in the 1988 interview report. Lawson also said that if the picture Ted showed him was in fact of Timothy King, then he knows who the Oakland County child killer is, and the guy in the photo with the King boy is the accomplice. Richard told me that he knows that guy's name and that he is still alive today. Richard indicated that he was not going to reveal these 2 names to me yet. When we arrived at the polygraph, Lawson indicated that he wanted to talk to his attorney first, before he takes the test. I called and spoke to Jim O'Donnell and handed the phone to Richard, who spoke to O'Donnell. O'Donnell agreed to send his assistant, Kim Meishan, out to the polygraph to speak with Richard. After Richard and Kim Meishan had a chance to talk, Richard asked me to meet with he and Kim. Richard asked Kim to tell me whether or not he told her the name of the guy in the photo with Timothy King and whether or not it would help solve the case. Kim Meishan answered yes. Kim Meishan then looked over the terms of the proffer statement and agreed that they were satisfactory to her and Richard Lawson. Kim was given an opportunity to sign the form and refused, stating that Jim O'Donnell agreed to it verbally yesterday. That is fine with me. The polygraph test was then conducted on Lawson, and the questions asked were as follows. Question number 1. In 1976 to 77, did you participate in killing any of those kids from Oakland County? Lawson answers no. Question number 2. Were you present when any of those kids were killed? Lawson answers no. Question number 3. Did you see anyone kill any of those kids in 1976 to 77, in Oakland County? Lawson answers no. Question number 4. Outside the photograph, do you know for sure who killed any of those kids? Lawson answers no. Report, it is the opinion of the polygraph examiner, based on the examination given, that the subject is being truthful in regards to this issue. After the polygraph, Richard was advised that he passed, and that we now know that, other than the name of the guy in the supposed photo with Timothy King, he has nothing else to offer detectives that could possibly assist them in the investigation. Richard seeing the photos shown to him by Ted Lamborghini in 1977, and Ted now knowing that Richard is in jail for murder and talking to us, would explain why Ted is so afraid of Richard. I advise Richard that if he supplies detectives with the names, we will investigate this, and if it pans out and leads to an arrest or solving of the case, he would get credit and some consideration on his charges. I made it clear to Richard that we would have to have the names first, and that we are not interested in any more of his theories on the OCCK case. No kidding. Citation 236. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams. December 1st, 2005. Meeting about information Lawson provided to investigators in 1988. Today I met with John Ellett from the FBI to discuss some new information that Ellett had found in the FBI files that relate to the Lawson-Moore-Lamborghini investigation. Present at this meeting was John and I, Gary Gray, Dave Robertson, and Ray Anger from Berkeley PD. John found a report that had been written by Detective Stutt from the Birmingham Police Department back in 1988. This report showed that Barry King, Timothy King's father, had been contacted by Richard Lawson via telephone from the Macomb jail in 1988. Lawson was awaiting trial on a 4-count CSC, child under 13 case, at the time. Lawson told Mr. King that he knew who killed his son. Detective Stutt, Detective Duncan, and Barry King went to the Macomb County Jail and interviewed Richard Lawson. During this interview, Lawson described a subject named Sheldon and 3 unnamed subjects as having been involved in a child pornography ring in the Cass Corridor in the mid to late 70s. Lawson also stated that these subjects were also involved in the OCCK case. Lawson stated that the King boy was also possibly filmed by these subjects before he was killed. This report contained information from Lawson that mirrors the information that I have gathered over the past 10 months in this case, minus the names. Lawson called these suspects numbers 1, 2, and 3 and gave descriptions to detectives during this 1988 interview. These descriptions given by Lawson for 2 and 3 matched Bob Moore and Ted Lamborghini, aka Ted Orr. The subject called number 1 by Lawson has not been identified. Lawson then asked for an immunity on over 20 years of pedophilia by him. Lawson's criminal sexual conduct case was dismissed, and this information was never followed up on. A subject named George McMahon was also mentioned in this report as being associated with this child pornography ring and having been a supplier of children to Bob Moore for filming. Lawson said in this interview that he didn't think that George McMahon had anything to do with the King killing. I met with Tom Yesler from the FBI today and briefed him and gave him surveillance workup sheets for the crew who were scheduled to follow Lamborghini in Cleveland from Monday, December 5th, 2005 through Wednesday, December 7th. The Michigan State Police surveillance crew is then going to follow Lamborghini from Thursday, December 8th through Sunday, December 11th. Citation 237. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams. November 27th, 2006. Theory about Ted and Duffy. After interviewing Greg Redacted in Tennessee, we are theorizing that Lawson was very close to putting the OCCK case together, but just couldn't prove it, and that's why Lawson passed the polygraph when asked the question, "Do you know for sure who killed the kids from Oakland County in 76 to 77? The reason Ted appeared to be afraid of Richard was because Ted wasn't sure if Richard had put all the pieces together or not, but was fairly certain he had, and Duffy may have even told Ted that he, Duffy, had run his mouth to Lawson about the killings, or seeing the King boy in a movie or picture. This would explain why Ted was surprised when we told him that Richard passed the polygraph. Lawson may have even told Ted that he knew what he had done. Ted was probably relieved when he heard that Lawson had passed. Ted had been afraid of Lawson for 30 years until we told him about Lawson passing the polygraph. During the interview of Greg Redacted, said that Ted's friend Duffy, black male since deceased, was frequenting poker games near the Wonder Bread plant in Detroit in the mid to late 70s. Lawson was also frequenting this same poker game where they would share pedophile stories about kids. Fay confirmed this along with the 1988 report when Lawson called Timothy King's father at home and told him that he knows who killed his son. Lawson was pretty sure he knew, again, but couldn't prove it. In this report, Lawson told Detective Stutt from Birmingham PD that he met the person he described in the report as number 1 at a poker game. Lawson described these subjects as 1, 2, and 3, and told detectives that he believed these to be the people responsible for the killing of Timothy King, and possibly the others. Lawson also told detectives in the 1988 report that number 1 was high on cocaine one night at a poker game, and told Lawson that he had seen a child porn movie with Timothy King in it. When Lawson asked 1 about this the other day, 1 denied ever saying that. If number 1 is Duffy, then that could possibly explain why Ted thought that Lawson knew. Duffy may have even told Ted that he ran his mouth at the poker game about the King boy, and Lawson asked him about it the next day. I've already identified numbers 2 and 3 when we found that report. Number 2 is Bob Moore, number 3 is Ted Lamborghini. We believe now that number 1 could possibly be Ted's friend Duffy. See 1988 FBI report on interview of Richard Lawson at the Macomb County Jail for details. Greg Redacted told detectives during his interview in Tennessee that Ted and Duffy would take kids out to other pedophiles' homes in the Royal Oak area in the mid-1970s. The pedophiles would swap kids, and at one point Ted threatened to kill the kids if they said anything. Redacted said that he walked in one time on Duffy and Michael Redacted, and that Duffy was performing anal sex on Michael Redacted. This would all make sense out of the fact that Ted was allowing Richard Lawson and Fay Redacted to stay in his apartment at Junction and Porter for free in the late 70s to early 80s, after Ted moved to Cleveland. Fay had told me a while ago during earlier interviews that Richard was also getting money from Ted when Ted would occasionally come to Detroit after moving to Cleveland. Both citations 238 and 239 are the case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 7th, 2007. FBI report from the Dutch police in Amsterdam today. Approximately a year and a half ago, John Owlett of the FBI forwarded a request to the FBI and Dutch police in Amsterdam to pursue a possible connection between a large distributor of child pornography in Amsterdam, according to Lawson, named Kim, Francis Sheldon, and the possibility of a connection with the Oakland County child killings. Lawson had told authorities in 1988, when he was facing life in prison for child molestation, that he had arrived to Amsterdam in 1979 and had a conversation with this Kim. Lawson said that Kim named Francis Sheldon and number 1 by name as having involvement in the abduction and murder of Timothy King. It's unbelievable that this is actually written out here. Like, it's just mind-blowing. Lawson had mentioned in the 1988 report that Francis Duffield Sheldon, pedophile from the southeast Michigan area, was the person who was financing the child porn photos and films in the Detroit area and shipping them to Amsterdam for distribution to the Eye of the Chickenhawk organization. Today, the FBI in Washington, D.C. forwarded a response they received from the Dutch police in Brussels in regards to our request. In this response, the Dutch authorities state that they compared all the photographs of our OCCK victims to photos and films they confiscated during a large child porn sting in Amsterdam in 1993, with negative results. However, they state that Kim was identified in the 1993 investigation as Kim Tam Eng, born April 16, 1933, a British national from Selangor, Malacca, living in Amsterdam. Eng was well known to Dutch police for child pornography and sexual abuse of minor boys in 1997. The Dutch police also provided that Francis Duffield Sheldon, white male born September 5, 1928, from Wayne County, Michigan, USA, died July 9, 1996, and he was also named in their investigation. Eng and Sheldon were both mentioned in an investigation by the Danish police in 1993 concerning child pornography and sexual offenses against minors. Danish police. This confirms Lawson's story. I wonder if he meant Dutch police. This confirms Lawson's story from Interpol. Citations 240 and 241. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 14, 2007. Another interesting possibility is that Josiah Tazalar is the #1 subject that Lawson described to Barry King in the 1988 FBI report that we have been trying to identify. We had already known that #2 was Bob Moore and #3 was Ted from their descriptions in that report. #1 had told Lawson in the late 70s or early 80s that he had seen the King Boy in a child porn movie. According to Lawson, #1 was living in the Highland Park area at that time and was named by Kim, the child porn magazine owner in Amsterdam, to Lawson in 1979, when Lawson was in Amsterdam, as having been involved in the killing of Timothy King. We've already confirmed that Lawson did in fact travel to Amsterdam in 1979, and according to Louise Hodgson, who interviewed in 1970s, when interviewed in 1977, Josiah makes trips abroad, indicating out of the country. Josiah is Dutch, and Amsterdam is the child porn capital. This is also where Francis Sheldon fled to in 1976 while under indictment. Francis Sheldon was a millionaire and was involved in financing child porn, just like Lawson had told me. Francis Sheldon's activities in Amsterdam and this Kim subject were both confirmed by the FBI stationed in Brussels. We had sent a lead to Brussels to check on this for us and received the positive response February 7, 2007. See details from FBI report from Brussels on February 7, 2007 for this information about Sheldon and Kim. Identified David Schultz today. Real name is Kent Gilbert Schultz, white male, born 1944. I was reading over the Francis Sheldon file tonight and observed a Kent Gilbert Schultz, born 1944, who resides at redacted Church Street, Highland Park, Michigan. We've been trying to identify the David Schultz that Lawson and Ike McKinnon talked about arresting in 1977, for child molestation in Highland Park. I knew David Schultz had lived in the house on Church Street near Woodward and Church behind the Methodist Church. I drove by there and observed that all the houses behind the church are gone. I knew the addresses would possibly be 19, 21, 23, etc. This Kent Gilbert Schultz at redacted Church Street matches what Lawson described for David Schultz. Citation 242. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 16, 2006, another repeat from earlier. We took Richard to his polygraph today at the Michigan State Police Post in Northville, Michigan. In the car, on the way from Wayne County Jail to the test, Lawson said that he had an opportunity to think last night and that he remembered the name of the subject he called #1 in the 1988 interview report. Lawson also said that if the picture Ted showed him was in fact of Timothy King, then he knows who the Oakland County child killer is, and the guy in the photo with the King boy is the accomplice. Richard told me that he knows the guy's name and that he's still alive today. Citation 243. Case notes of Corey Williams, February 9, 2007. I identified William Tazalar today and his home in Birmingham, situated a few blocks from Timothy King's house. Tonight I was talking to Special Agent John Owlett, the FBI, about this 505 Golden Gate address in Highland Park that Tazalar has. John and I thought it looks like from records that he may possibly still be maintaining or connected to that home, even though he is living in the apartments at 13 Mile and Woodward in Royal Oak. When I got off the phone, I ran Josiah Tazzler through the AutoTrack computer system. This revealed that Josiah has also had a past address at 2762 Windmere in Birmingham, Michigan. I noticed that there were 2 people connected to Josiah, listed on the report as relatives. The first was a Willem Hendrik Tazzelaar, born August 2, 1938, possibly a brother. The second was Ruth Tazzelaar, born 1942, possibly sister-in-law. This computer check revealed that Willem and Ruth Tazzelaar had lived at redacted Windmere in Birmingham, Michigan since 1969 to 2007. I put the redacted Windmere address into the MapQuest computer program, which revealed that the Tazzelaars live and have lived in the same neighborhood approximately 3 to 6 blocks from the King family for many years. This Windmere Street is also one of the streets in that neighborhood that Pembroke Park is on. This appears to be the local park for that neighborhood. Also in the AutoTrack computer check, it shows Willem Tazzelaar to be connected to and owner of Tazzelaar Associates Architects. Upon further computer checks, I observed that Tazzelaar's architectural business is currently located on 12 Mile Road in Southfield, Michigan. The check only shows back to 1993, and it appears as if the business was possibly located somewhere else prior to 93. I drove around the Maple Road and Adams Road area this afternoon and observed several 1950 to 60 style office buildings along Maple Road near the King family's home. I will be checking to see if the Tazzelaar's business was possibly located in Birmingham near the King's home prior to their current Southfield location. Citation 244, Case Notes of Detective Corey Williams, December 1st, 2005. Lawson was awaiting trial on a 4-count CSC charge at the time. Lawson told Mr. King that he knew who killed his son. Detective Stutt, Detective Duncan, and Barry King went to the Macomb County Jail and interviewed Richard Lawson. During this interview, Lawson described a subject named Sheldon and 3 unnamed subjects as having been involved in a child pornography ring in the Cass Corridor in the mid to late 70s. Lawson also stated that these subjects were also involved in the OCCK case. Lawson stated that the King boy was also possibly filmed by these subjects before he was killed. This report contained information from Lawson that mirrors the information that I have gathered over the past 10 months in this case, minus the names. Lawson called these suspects numbers 1, 2, 3, and gave descriptions to detectives during this 1988 interview. These descriptions given by Lawson for 2 and 3 matched Bob Moore and Ted Lamborghini, aka Ted Orr. The subject called number 1 by Lawson has not been identified. Lawson then asked for immunity on over 20 years of pedophilia by him. Lawson's CSC case was dismissed and this information was never followed up on. Citation 245, Case Notes of Corey Williams, February 8, 2007. Ray Anger of Berkeley PD and I went to Josiah Tazzelaar's apartment in Royal Oak today with some good polygraph dates in an attempt to set up a day to polygraph Tazzelaar about the OCCK case. We were also going to ask him for consent to swab him for DNA. There was no answer at the door or on the speaker outside his building. I left my card in his door and requested that he contact me by phone. A phone call from Tazzelaar informed me he had hired an attorney. Tazzelaar found my card in his door and called me. I told him that I just wanted to set up a good time with him, to run a few more names by him and show him a few photos. He told me that after we left his place the last time, he went and got a lawyer. I said, "A lawyer? We weren't accusing you of anything. We just talked about people from your past." He said, "I answered your questions." Tazzelaar went on to say that anything we want to talk to him about or any contact with him from here on out has to go through his attorney. I asked for his attorney's name and phone number. Tazzelaar told me that his name is Michael D. Elkins, and his number is 248-945-9800. I told Tazzelaar that I would call Mr. Elkins and reminded him that when we left the last time, he said he would take a polygraph. Tazzelaar said that he was reluctant then and said he wasn't going to do anything that his attorney advised him not to do. I asked Tazzelaar if his attorney said it was okay to take the test, would he take it? He said, "You have to talk to my attorney." I told him that I would and we would be in touch with him. The phone call was terminated. Citation 246, Case Notes of Corey Williams, March 21st, 2007. Today, Rob Moran of Wayne County Prosecutor's Office Homicide Unit faxed me the letter of use the letter of use immunity for Josiah Tazzler. This letter is in regards to 3 specific 30-year-old CSCs committed by Josiah Tazzler. The letter was signed by Elizabeth Walker, the Deputy Chief of Special Prosecutions at the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. I faxed a copy of the use immunity agreement to Michael Elkin's office. They called and confirmed that they had received it via fax. This is something else for 246. This is from the April 4th, 2007 entry. I spoke with Michael Elkins this afternoon about Josiah Tazzler. Mr. Elkins indicated to me that he had a conversation with Josiah about this waiver and that Josiah told him that he didn't think his doctor was going to authorize a waiver to take a polygraph due to the condition of his heart. Mr. Elkins told me that he was not certain of that yet and would call me when he gets the doctor's determination in writing from Josiah. Sounds like Josiah came up with a good excuse not to take it, yeah. Section 247. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams. July 31st, 2006 entry. Info from David Taylor in Jackson Prison. Gary Gray called me today and said that he received a phone call and then a letter from the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office addressed to David Gorsica from an inmate in Jackson Prison named David Taylor. Supposedly, this Taylor subject, who fancies himself as a jailhouse lawyer, has become friends with Richard Lawson over the past few months. Taylor stated in his letter that Lawson has made statements and admissions to him about killing the kids from Oakland County years ago, and that he, Taylor, believes this information and wants to meet to give the information to a detective. Taylor supposedly did not ask for anything in return, but states that you have to draw a line when it comes to killing kids, and that he can't sleep at night. That certainly is a line. Taylor also said that Lawson told him about a plan he has to put the whole case on someone else. John, Gary, and I are going to meet on Wednesday to talk about this information from David Taylor and get a copy of the letter. I found him in the Michigan Department of Corrections database. He's identified as David Allen Taylor, a white male born November 4th, 1949. Taylor is currently serving 40 to 200 years for an armed robbery he committed in Rochester, Michigan back in 1985. Taylor had a long criminal history prior to that. I talked to Steve Scharschmidt from Parma Heights PD today about Ted Lamborghini. Steve told me that Ted had recently renewed his lease at the apartments in their city for another year, but that he has had no contact with Ted, even though he has called Ted's phone several times. I asked Steve and his partner, Wayne Mockler, under my direction to go interview Ted in an attempt to obtain an admission or confession from Ted about his sexual involvement with several young boy victims in the Detroit area back in the 70s. I faxed Steve a list of names of young boys that we have interviewed in the recent past that have told investigators that Ted paid them for sex when they were minors in the 70s in Detroit. I directed the Parma Heights detectives to review this interview with Ted Lamborghini. The Parma Heights detectives agreed to conduct and record the interview. At approximately 10 o'clock p.m. this evening, Detective Scharschmidt called me and stated that during the course of their interview with Ted, he admitted to having sex with several of the approximately 13 young boys named from the list that I had faxed to Detective Scharschmidt. Steve told me that Ted said he thought several of the young boys he had sex with were 14 to 15 years old. Here's a second one for 247 from August 24th, 2005. First interview of Ted Lamborghini in Parma Heights, Ohio. Traveled to Cleveland, Ohio today with MSP Detective Gray to interview Theodore Lamborghini, aka Ted Orr. We worked in conjunction with Parma Heights Police Department, Detectives Mockler and Scharschmidt, and established surveillance on Lamborghini's apartment building. After approximately 2.5 hours, he came out, got into a new burgundy Ford pickup, was stopped by Parma Heights PD, and agreed to come to their station for an interview. During the 3-hour interview, Lamborghini admitted his involvement in pedophilia in Detroit in the 70s with Lawson, Tippett, Moore, and Schuler, but stated he had nothing to do with the Oakland County child killings. He did give a couple small inconsistencies. He did, however, agree to come to Michigan and take a polygraph about his involvement in the OCCK case. The polygraph was scheduled with the MSP examiner on September 6, 2005. We also swabbed Lamborghini for DNA. I will hold off on forwarding the DNA swab to the FBI lab until we see the polygraph results. Lamborghini mentioned during the interview that Richard Lawson used to carry a handgun back in the late 70s, and that he knew that Richard Lawson burned his own house down on 23rd Street in southwest Detroit back in the late 70s or early 80s for the insurance money. Lamborghini said that he was fairly close with Bob Moore, but didn't really know Bob Schuler, or Big Bob, that well. Lamborghini said that the group of pedophiles gave him the name of Ted Orr back in the 70s, so he used it on the street. Lamborghini went on to say that Bob Moore had molested a lot of young boys in his day. Lamborghini said that he saw a photo album with hundreds of young boys' pictures that Moore had molested in the 70s. Ted said that Moore had a bicycle shop out of a house on Cass Avenue in Detroit. Ted went on to say that he and the others in his group did in fact participate in, quote, Boys' Night Out, which consisted of he and the others picking up young boys, molesting them. Lamborghini said that this usually took place at Lawson's house. Ted asked how Faye was doing, referring to Faye Redacted, who Ted said used to cook for them and the children they brought around the house. Jesus fucking Christ. Talking more about Bob Moore, Ted said that he had never been to Moore's apartment on Henry and thought that he stayed at the home that was his bike shop on Cass. When asked, Lamborghini said that Moore rented other rooms out to people living at the bike shop house. Citation 248. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, March 28, 2007. Prosecutor Rob Moran talked to Lamborghini's attorney today in court prior to Lamborghini's case being called. His attorney, Reedy Young, told Moran that Lamborghini wants to plead guilty to all 15 counts of CSC instead of retaking the polygraph or cooperating the OCCK case with an opportunity to reduce his sentence to possibly 15 years. Very peculiar. Moran had indicated to Ted's attorney that no matter what Ted's level of participation in the killings was, that we could work something out with him, indicating that even if he himself were the killer, we would be willing to negotiate in order to solve the case. Ted turned down every opportunity to help himself out and to clear himself after failing the original polygraph in September 2005. We believe, based on Ted's actions, that he has decided to take his information about the Oakland County child killings to his grave. Ted's sentencing is scheduled in front of Judge Barry on April 20th, 2007. Prosecutor Moran believes Ted will be sentenced to a minimum of 25 to 40 years, which is a life sentence for Ted. We also believe the reason Ted did not want to help himself out and cooperate in the OCCK case is because he does not want to be labeled the Oakland County child killer. Ted can live with being a child molester, but not a murderer. He told detectives during his interview in Ohio after his arrest that he does not want to be labeled a murderer or accessory to murder. It's a label that Ted does not want attached to him. The media, all 3 Detroit stations and newspapers, were all over Ted turning down this offer and pleading guilty to all charges. We released the following to them. The details of the 2 offers made to Ted and the significance of him turning these down. The fact that by no means does this put a halt to our investigation, stating further that we are continuing to investigate Lamborghini and his associates. We also talked about how excited we are because the MSP scientists at the forensics lab in Lansing are currently processing the victim's clothes for DNA and finding DNA material. We told them we are hopeful, but we don't know yet whether the DNA material is from the victims or from the suspects, stating that it will take several months to get an answer back. Citation 248 again, revisiting the crimes from the Detroit Free Press, June 17, 2012. So at the top here, this top portion from the article was kind of running through the possible suspects in the case. You'd see Lamborghini there on the far right. Retired Ford worker serving life sentences for his role in a Detroit pedophile ring in the 70s and 80s. He denied any involvement in the child killings. And down here, more about Lamborghini. Theodore Lamborghini pleaded to assaults in the Cass corridor. Lamborghini says no to offers in confession. Authorities tried everything to coax Theodore Lamborghini into confessing to the Oakland County child killings. They offered the retired Parma Heights, Ohio auto worker, now 71, a whopping sentence reduction for his role in a pedophile ring that operated in Detroit's Cass corridor in the 1970s and 80s. They offered to send him to a prison of his choice and even give him a new identity so he wouldn't be branded a child molester. But he wouldn't bite. He said he didn't do it, and I don't think he did, recalled retired Berkeley detective Sergeant Ray Anger, who offered some of the deals to Lamborghini. In 2007, Lamborghini pled guilty to sexually assaulting boys in the Cass Corridor case. He was sentenced that April to 3 life prison terms. Police said he and his cohorts lured their victims into motel rooms, homes, and the basement of a bicycle shop with food, cash, and drugs. Once there, the group made pornographic movies of the children and sold them in the US and Europe. A member of the ring, Richard Lawson, now 66, who was serving a life prison sentence for the 1989 murder of a cab company owner in Livonia, told authorities that Lamborghini was involved in the child killings. When Wayne County prosecutor Kim Worthy announced Lamborghini's arrest in the Cass Corridor case in December 2006, she called him the most promising suspect at this particular time in the child killer case. But Oakland County authorities downplayed her claim. Prosecutors initially offered him 25 to 50 years in prison if he'd take a polygraph in the child killer case. When he refused, they offered him 15 years. He rejected both plea deals. I believe he has information, I really do, and unfortunately he may take it to his grave, State Police Detective Sergeant Gary Gray said at the time. Lamborghini's lawyer, Rita Young, said in 2007 that her client didn't know anything about the killings, had already taken a polygraph exam, and did not want to go through it again. Troy attorney David Binkley sued Lamborghini in October 2007 on behalf of the family of Mark Stebbins, the child killer's first victim. But Binkley said he withdrew the suit when investigators told him Lamborghini wasn't the one. He was being assaulted in prison because of the child molester label, Binkley recalled recently. When I went to see him, I told him I was prepared to make him a very generous offer, the prison of his choice and an alias to avoid the child molester label. He just looked at me and said, I can't tell them what I don't know. Citation 249. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, July 31st, 2007. I returned a phone message today from Kathy Broad King, Timothy King's older sister, who is an attorney living in the Chicago area. Kathy told me that she received some information from a friend of hers that she wanted to relay to me that may be a good lead in her brother's case. She told me that she's been in contact with her brother Chris, who resides in the Detroit area, about this information, and advised her to call Sergeant Williams at Livonia Police Department. I've had the opportunity to meet Chris King a couple of times during the past couple of years while investigating the Ted Lamborghini lead in the OCCK case. Kathy began by telling me that a close friend of hers that she grew up with, named Patrick Coffey, is a private polygraph examiner in the state of California and attended a polygraph examiners convention in Las Vegas approximately a year ago. While at this convention, Coffey struck up a conversation with another examiner attending the conference after noticing the other examiner was from Southfield, Michigan. This other examiner Coffey spoke with is named Lawrence Wasser. Wasser runs a private polygraph business in Southfield, Michigan, and has been a licensed examiner in Michigan since 1975. During this conversation, Coffey began telling Wasser the reason he got into the polygraph business 20 years ago. He told Wasser that he became an examiner because of a close friend and neighbor of his while growing up in Birmingham, Michigan, that was abducted and killed in 1977 named Timothy King. Kathy King stated that Coffey told her that Wasser was visibly stunned and shaken when Coffey talked about his close friend being Timothy King. According to Coffey, Wasser's body language and overall reaction and mood change indicated to Coffey that he had struck a nerve with Wasser when saying the name Timothy King. Kathy told me that Coffey stated to her that Wasser then reminded Coffey of their obligation to the polygraph examiner and client confidentiality privilege, telling Coffey that he polygraphed a guy 30 years ago that confessed to being involved in the Oakland County child killings. Wasser told Coffey that the suspect was brought to his office by the suspect's attorney for a polygraph unrelated to the child killings, at which time the suspect confessed to killing Timothy King. This was, of course, Christopher Bush. Kathy relayed to me that Coffey told her Wasser stated that the suspect is now deceased, and so is his attorney. Kathy also relayed to me that Wasser is supposed to be approximately 60 years old. Citation 250. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 27, 2008. Met with polygraph examiner John Wojnarski, J might be silent, retired MSP today, and he looked at Bush and Green's charts. We had examiner Wojnarski review the charts from Bush and Green's polygraphs today without Wojnarski knowing anything about the case or the polygraphs. After reviewing and numerically scoring the charts, he determined that Green was failing on relevant questions, but that the examiner that conducted the original test in 1977 did not ask Green the relevant questions that he was failing about involvement on the first two charts, on the third chart, like he should have. Wojnarski stated that he did not understand this and stated you have to ask the relevant questions on all three charts, especially when Green was failing on the first two. Citation 251. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams, August 28, 2008. FBI report from the interview of Chris Bush's older brother, Charles Nels Bush, in New York City. We received the fax report today from Special Agent McDonald of the FBI on the interview of Charles Bush that he and his partner conducted at Bush's part-time residence at Redacted. Charles Bush was cooperative and agreed to an interview with the agents. Charles Bush was somewhat hesitant at first to supplying agents with a sample of his DNA, but later agreed, but with conditions. These conditions are listed on the second page, which shows page number 4 at the top of the following FBI report that I scanned into this ongoing report. And this was something that we covered earlier back. It is interesting that Charles Bush has conditions to supplying DNA as far as us notifying him prior to making any announcement, like a press conference, on the results of the DNA. He also requested that prior to the task force making any announcement about Christopher Bush's DNA in the OCCK case, that Bush family members in Michigan be allowed to enter a witness protection type program. We also covered that. According to McDonald's report, Charles Bush was adamant about these conditions being agreed to prior to supplying his DNA. Repeat here for citation 252. We return here to the FBI report on interview with Charles Nels Bush, advising that his family never talked about the Oakland County child killing case or whether Chris could have been involved, but Charles advised that later in life his father, which is H. Lee Bush of General Motors, shredded all of the family documents to include birth certificates, which Charles stated was strange. Citation 255 comes from a now deleted website that was published by Barry King, the father of Timothy King. He previously had a website that was entitled A Father's Story that appeared to be basically used by him to chronicle excerpts of a book that he was working on entitled A Father's Story, Oakland County Child Killer. So this is retrieved through Internet Archive, excuse me. And this text is taken directly from that. Richard Lawson, a convicted murderer and pedophile activist in the Detroit Cass Avenue corridor, wrote me a letter and asked for a meeting to discuss the OCCK case. I had met Lawson previously and had little respect for him. Dave Binkley of my law firm agreed to visit with him. Binkley was under instructions not to talk to him about anything other than the Christopher Bush involvement. Lawson advised Binkley that his associate Bobby Moore used to take young boys to visit with H. Lee Bush, the father of Christopher Bush. Lawson has subsequently died, and I am not aware as to whether or not the task force followed up on this information. Citation 256. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, April 7, 2006. Interview of Terry Redacted. John Owlett and I went and interviewed Terry Redacted today on Flora Street in Detroit. Sharon Redacted answered the door. We interviewed Terry for approximately 45 minutes at his kitchen table. We didn't tell Terry that we had talked to Redacted a few days prior to him. During the course of this interview, Redacted identified Ted Orr right away when I showed him a known photo of Lamborghini. Terry admitted a sexual relationship between he and Bob Moore, but said that it took place on 14th Street in Detroit and not on Henry Street. Redacted also said that Moore prostituted him out when he was a young teenage boy, stating that Moore drove him to a home on a lake in Pontiac, Michigan, and the older white man, Bill, that he had sex with, had a large boat docked in front of the house. Redacted went on to say that the homeowner paid Moore the money, and Moore in turn gave him some money for letting the homeowner perform oral sex on him. This matches information from Lawson, who had stated in earlier interviews that he and Moore took a young boy to a Chrysler executive's home on the east side, possibly in Warren, back in the mid to late 70s, and the executive paid Moore to have sex with the boy. This also matches information from Tony Kowalczyk, see his interview. Citation 257 comes from a comment that was on Kathy Broad's blog. Kathy Broad King is the sister of Timothy King. This actually isn't from like a literal comment on a post that you can go back and see on her post. This is actually within the post, a post of hers itself, where she is basically commenting on a comment she got elsewhere. And the post in question of what this is from is the OCCK Labyrinth from May 20th, 2016, from Kathy Broad's blog. So she's writing this. Here's a comment I received today on an earlier post that reminded me I needed to post. Hi, Kathy. I was a teenager in Detroit at the time, and my father had a stamp and coin store at Eastland Shopping Center. One of his customers was E. Harwood Rideholm, a big executive at Chrysler. Mr. Rideholm told my dad that the OCCK was the son of a powerful GM exec, and that the police were protecting GM's reputation, so he probably wouldn't be arrested. Mr. Rideholm passed away in 1987. The ghastly part is that Mr. Rideholm told my father this shortly after Christine Mihalik went missing. Citation 258 is a copy of an email that was received by Kathy Broad and that she uploaded on her blog entry entitled Going Forward from October 28th, 2019. So on the left here is part of the actual post in which she's talking about being sent this, and then you can see she provides the download link to a snapshot of this email, and then on the right is that email. So Kathy writes, today, consider this horrifying email I received. I redacted it for obvious reasons. The writer specifically says, I tried to tell law enforcement for investigative purposes. Law enforcement has not replied to my calls, only informed me they were very busy. She then provides the link. Very busy. So here's the email. My redacted GM executives and other affluent men like Dick Chrysler of Cars and Concepts at the time. There was a highly organized underground child pornography cult in the Oakland area in 1976. The children were taken to the house of the personal accountant and primed for filming. We were passed around various babysitters to prep us for movies in secrecy. Several of the boys were so brutally sodomized they were hospitalized. Many did not survive. What your blogger that grew up in Detroit is saying is probably true. I was there and I only survived redacted. One of the first responders at the scene, a family friend, came to warn us of what the GM employer's son had done in the writing across the windshield of the car, which said, the devil made me do it. I tried to tell local law enforcement for investigative purposes. Law enforcement has not replied to my calls, only informed me they were very busy. My God, we played with the same dogs during filming, and I know the massive storage shed out back is covered in our DNA. The movies were collected and transported in VHS Scooby-Doo cases by the box loads, I assume for production and or distribution. Much of the evidence was burned around 1978, and it was very important we were all kept immaculate. Which, that very much rings the bell of the victims of the OCCK killings being kept very clean when they were abducted and then found in very clean, of very clean persons on them. I have considered reaching out to your dad many times, but I am afraid. I have photo albums of myself interviewing, unclothed, with strange children I can only assume were also involved. I remember my training no matter how I try to forget. I also remember a tall, long-haired brunette girl in a white eyelet ankle-length dress with a red sash um, sparing me from a filming session once. I never saw her again. I have the names of everyone mentioned above, with the exception of the eyelet angel that probably saved my life. I was one of the children that lived. I know the house layout and previous owner, the names of a few responsible dead and still living, and their new name and location. Another survivor in hiding, and the type of dogs we all played with. These are very powerful men, and I fear for my and my children's safety. Trust no one, not even the parents. Citation 259. Letter sent to Barry King from February 7th, 2014, as uploaded on Kathy Broad's blog post. When I heard the details, GM executive, organized ring of sexual abuse, etc., my blood ran cold. And this post was from December 13th, 2020. Same kind of deal here. You can see on the left the content of the actual post where she describes seeing this letter, and then provides a download link to read the letter. So Kathy writes, I'm going through an overwhelming 18-plus high stack of emails, letters, and documents that I had to put to the side in order not to drown over the past couple of years. Here's a copy of a letter sent to my dad about 4 years ago. For obvious reasons, identifying information has been obscured. So this letter from February 7th, 2014. Mr. King, please find enclosed a check for $20 for the DVD. I found your daughter's blog only last night, and I will put the link out in my network. The DVD he's referring to here is, I believe it's called Decades of Deceit. This was a very comprehensive documentary that the King family put out at the time of the police chicanery really kind of being at its worst as far as the investigation goes. This was like in the early 2010s. That's basically them walking through the bungling, basically, of the entire investigation. And they put it out on DVD. Please send the DVD to, and then it's redacted. I grew up in Southfield in the 70s. This case was and is the first major imprint of my childhood, and has always been in the back of my mind, so to speak, throughout my life. By way of a personal related anecdote, a woman very close to me was the daughter of a GM executive who served at that company at the same time Bush's father was there. She was sexually abused as a child by her father and several of his professional associates throughout the mid to late 1970s. In the late 90s, we engaged a private investigator to help prepare a legal case against her father and these monsters, and among the investigator's conclusions was the theory that there existed an organized ring of pedophiles within GM's executive management at the time, and that offering up a child was a kind of ticket into the upper ranks of management. By the way, the investigator, who was from the West Coast, met with a certain degree of cooperation from local law enforcement, but was told time and time again, don't waste your time, the case won't go anywhere. Alas, time and money were not on our side. We were not able to pursue the case, and the woman's father left the state, took ill, and died before I could question him myself in a more direct manner. I never heard of Bush until the media came out with that story a few years ago. When I heard the details, GM executive, organized ring of sexual abuse, etc., my blood ran cold. May God give you strength to continue fighting the good fight. Thank you. Sincerely, redacted. Citation 261 is FBI victim statement, file number 31CDENEW, Milford, Michigan, June 19, 1992. This serves as the testimony of an unnamed woman who had firsthand experience within this larger pedophile ring in Michigan. Basically commandeered by these very powerful bigwigs, including many with affiliations with GM and other corporations. So we're going to read through this. This comes from the Hot Star website. And again, this is July 6, 1992. Redacted, after having been advised of the identity of the interviewing agent and the nature of the interview, furnished the following information. Redacted advised that following redacted diagnosis with redacted, began to have flashbacks of history of sexual abuse which occurred in their family. Redacted stated that the return of her memory coincided with Redacted's. Be a whole lot of redactions here. Also helped by Redacted entering counseling the following Redacted. Redacted advised that it was long redacted. That initiated recall of what she described to be childhood sexual abuse which occurred in her family, to include a ring of child abusers and the witnessing of the homicides of 2 children. Redacted advised that it was not until Redacted that she was able to bring about full recall of an incident that occurred in what she believes to be approximately 1976. Redacted stated that this incident involves her and her sister Redacted and her father Redacted, date of birth Redacted, according to Redacted, while she and her sister Redacted looked on. Redacted was attempting to quiet the screams of a small boy whom she tentatively identified as Redacted. The boy was described as being approximately 5 to 8 years old with blonde curly hair. Redacted stating that as the boy knelt on the ground, her father brought back what she described to be a baseball bat and struck the boy in the head. Redacted stated she then recalled the boy falling down and not moving, and somehow knowing that the boy was dead. According to Redacted, both she and her sister Redacted discussed between each other that the boy indeed had died. Her next recall of that situation was that her father was somehow discussing what to do with the boy's body. Redacted then explained that she witnessed a second homicide of a 9-year-old female whom she cannot identify. Redacted stated that she was approximately 12 years old at the time of this death. Redacted does not recall where the death took place or who took the girl's life. Redacted could only remember that she was in an office which to her at the time appeared to be a doctor's office, and that a girl approximately 9 years old was lying naked on an examining table. The girl had long, dark brown hair. The girl appeared to be, in Redacted words, prepubescent, and becoming very frenzied regarding this treatment. As a result, Redacted, an individual, it appears to be an attempted redaction there, began to what appeared to be stabbing the girl in the stomach, and then she remembers the girl falling off the table and lying on the ground in an awkward angle. Redacted then remembers that there was some discussion on what would be done with this girl. So this is just absolutely just the most nightmarish thing you could just ever imagine. Redacted stated that she believes her father was involved at the time in a pedophile or child abuser's ring. She stated that her father recruited members for this ring from his associates and from members of St. Joseph's Church, which is located in Dexter, Michigan. She stated that at the time her father was employed at Redacted as Redacted in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Redacted further stated that there was an individual whom she cannot identify residing in Ann Arbor who was the ringleader for this particular organization of people. She stated the only thing she can recall is that he was a very prominent and powerful person in the Ann Arbor community. She stated that he was a very large man with dark hair and possibly a beard. Redacted also advised that Redacted, date of birth Redacted, telephone number Redacted, also molested her and had sexual intercourse with her until she was 18 years of age. She stated that there was also an individual identified as Redacted who owned and operated a practice on Main Redacted in Dexter, Michigan. According to Redacted, Redacted performed an abortion on her sister Redacted, who was pregnant with her father's child. Redacted stated that her father forced her to watch this abortion with the plan that if Redacted was sufficiently shocked at the situation, she would not become pregnant. Redacted also advised that an individual identified as Redacted was a childhood friend and may have some memories of this abusive situation. Redacted did remember that when constituting this child pornography or pedophile ring would come together, they were usually occupying a shed near a gravel pit in Dexter, Michigan. She cannot recall any further details regarding the meetings or their locations other than this particular place. Redacted advised that she is currently redacted at the Redacted. She stated that it was through a colleague there named Redacted that she became aware that she should report her recall of this abuse to some type of law enforcement authority. Redacted stated that she absolutely will not report any of these incidents to the Dexter Police Department or any local police department, and that she feels that somehow during the time of this abuse, circa 1975 to 1976, some police officers were somehow involved.